Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku was born for darkness. If you guys enjoy this movie, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻 from AO3. So let's start the video. Izuku could not say he had ever had hope for a bright future. Maybe when he was 4, when his mom was still alive, and he had not developed his quirk yet. He did not necessarily have a bad quirk, it just wasn't the quirk his father wanted him to have. His father, the biggest bad in all of quirk's history, with the ability to take and give quirks. That was the quirk he had wanted him to inherit. He was supposed to be the next big bad, the successor to All For One. From the moment he learned to walk, he was standing on the mat learning hand-to-hand combat. And from the moment he learned to talk, he got lessons in English, math, history, and even hacking. The all-knowing All For One could not have a less than perfect kid. When he was young, that was fine. All he wanted to do was make his mother proud. He didn't see his father that much, and the few times he had seen him were not happy memories. But that all changed when he developed his quirk. It wasn't a bad quirk, he quite liked it actually, but it was not the right one. The ability to amplify other quirks was not the quirk of a leader, a monarch, someone who would rule over others, because he would always be dependent on other people and their quirks. What kept him alive after the revelation of his quirk was that he was still smart and a strong fighter. And because of the sacrifice of his mother, he got a chance to redeem himself. This is what led up to him getting his mother's quirk. Because even though he could not take and give quirks, his father could. His father gave him his mother's quirk and he could take it. Later, after multiple experiments, it turned out that his body had inherited his father's capability to hold multiple quirks. He was still a failure, but he had a redeeming factor. The quirks he got from his father also combined with his own quirk, and he could use it to amplify himself. He would be a good pawn for the other possible inheritor of One For All's legacy, Tenko Shimura, even though he went by Tamura Shigaraki now. Izuku's training intensified. He had to make up for his genetic failures, and he had to learn to use all the new quirks that were forced upon him. But now, after his mother's death, he was not as willing to cooperate as before, which led to some harsher measures being implemented to keep him motivated. All in all, Izuku didn't have much say in his own life anymore. He did what he was told if he didn't want the consequences that came with disobeying. When he wasn't out on a mission, he was locked in a cramped room without much to do. Luckily or unluckily, depending on how you looked at it, he was often occupied with assignments. Said assignment could range from breaking or hacking a hero agency, recruiting new recruits, gathering people with useful quirks, and threatening people who had not repaid a debt. Izuku hated his life. Before he knew any better, he wanted to be a hero. That dream had been crushed massively. Now he was the opposite, his own worst enemy. He hurt people. He had temporarily kidnapped children for All For One to steal their quirks and then return them. His one uncrossable line was killing. No matter the pain they put him, though, he would never take a life. Though he did fear the day when there was no other escape. Now here he was right after breaking in and hacking the police archives. He was just about to jump out of the window when he heard a voice from behind. "Hey kid, stop right there." It was Eraserhead. Crap. Of all the heroes to be on patrol right now. This wasn't the first time he had met the underground hero Eraserhead. The last time had ended with him breaking the hero's ankle and jumping away. Not the best first impression. One wrong move and the hero would erase his quirks and be on him in seconds. The only reason he had made it away the first time was that he probably didn't expect someone to be so adept at fighting quirkless. People rely too much on their quirks these days. Even if the hero was most definably better, you could never underestimate the element of surprise. He glanced once toward the window. He was on the 3rd floor, not an ideal height to jump without his flight quirk. Eraserhead seemed to notice his nervousness and continued on. "I'm not here to arrest you, I just want to talk. I'm sorry if I have a hard time believing you. I just broke into this building, and you're a hero." He could feel a small tingle from his wrist. A warning. He was taking too much time. He needed to get out before it got worse. "I don't know what you have gotten yourself into, but you don't have to do this. I can help you." Eraserhead sounded genuine. Izuku couldn't help the longing for what he said to be true, but no one could help him. It was also frustrating. He didn't even know what he was talking about. Izuku had never had a choice. He had literally been born into this. And sure, you didn't need to become who your parent wanted you to become, which he didn't. But I wasn't anything he could do about it either. "You don't know anything. What even makes you believe that I am a kid? I could be as old as you for all you know." He did admit his disguise wasn't the best. He only wore a cap, and he had a scarf pulled up above his nose. It wasn't really meant to hide his identity, because what would be the point? He didn't exist in any records anyone could use to find out anything about him. The little disguise was majorly used to hide his age. No one was afraid of a 13-year-old kid. even though his height did nothing to help with that. He was in every sense of the word short, even for his age. In our previous shuffle, you dropped your scarf at the end. I saw your face, and I recognize a kid when I see one, especially one who looks like he is in need of help. A shuffle is a kind way of explaining me breaking your ankle. He was growing increasingly nervous. The previous small tingle in his wrist grew increasingly more painful, and he couldn't help the small shaking in his hand. He quickly grabbed it with his other hand to make it stop, but it did not go unnoticed by the hero. "Are you okay?" he asked as he took one step closer. "Yes, I'm totally fine. Although it seems our little chat will have to end here." He made his way closer to the window. If he had to, he would make the jump without the help of his quirk. It was just a tuck and roll right. "Wait," 𝐬𝐻 interrupted. He grabbed a piece of paper and pen and wrote something down on it before crumpling it up and throwing it towards him. Izuku caught it and looked at it. It was a phone number. "If you are ever in trouble, you can call me on that number. I promise I won't arrest you or anything without hearing the whole story." Izuku was just about to throw it away, but then he hesitated. Instead, he took the paper and put it in his pocket. He wasn't even sure why he even did it. He was never going to use it anyway. He couldn't. He then turned and immediately jumped out the window before the hero could say anything else. Luckily for him, the hero hadn't erased his quirk, and instead of preparing for a probably painful landing, he took to the sky instead. 𝐲𝐻𝐬 was left standing looking out the window after the kid. He had seen in the kid's eyes that he would jump out the window no matter what he did, quirk or not. The kid would probably not use his note, but perhaps it would make him trust him a little more. 𝐲𝐻𝐬 didn't know what had made him so invested in this kid. Ever since he had met him the first time, seeing the kid's face, he just couldn't get him out of his head. He had seemed so lost, in pain, like he had nothing left to fight for. It could also be that being a teacher for the last few years was rubbing off on him. He could still remember Hisashi's gleeful face when he had told him about the kid. Getting personally invested in a kid isn't common for you, because telling him that a kid, probably 12 or 13 years old, had broken his leg and he had said he would personally keep an eye out for him, could warrant that gleeful smile. He had to admit, though, he had put a lot of time and effort into finding him again. It shouldn't take as much time as it had. He had seen the kid's face after all. He had even asked the rat for help, but not even he could find any evidence that a kid like him even existed. He was heading back to his apartment again. It was nothing more he could do today. Besides, he had to plan the lessons for tomorrow. When he opened the door, he was met with two yellow eyes staring up at him. "Were you staying up for me again, Carrot?" he asked as he picked up the orange cat and headed in. 4 a.m. He sighed and sat down at the table. He really should have planned this lesson yesterday. At least he could sleep while the class would choose their class representative. He suspected it would be Mirio who was chosen. He was the most talkative in the class. Not that he much cared about the outcome if they just let him sleep. When he had finished the last details, he headed towards his bed with Carrot in tow. He almost felt sorry for the cat. He was rarely home with his 2 jobs. The times that he was home, the cat wouldn't leave him alone, craving attention. So, as he lay down on the bed, Carrot crawled up beside him and started purring. And 𝐲𝐻𝐬 didn't mind at all. The small vibrations were almost soothing. He couldn't help sending one last thought out for the kid as he slowly faded off to sleep with the small purring from the cat. He would find him again. And this time he wouldn't let him get away without getting a few answers. When Izuku got back to base, he found his mentor waiting for him there. "What took you so long?" he asked in a serious voice. Izuku knew there was no point in trying to lie. If he wanted to, he could just find it out on his own. "I got distracted by a hero, sir." "What hero was it?" "𝐬𝐻𝐻, sir." Izuku kept his gaze down. He didn't want to do anything that could irritate him. He knew firsthand what would happen then. In the best case, it was just a small beating. In the worst case, well, let's not think about that. "Is that not the second time you have met him during a mission?" "Yes, sir, it is. If he continues to be a problem, we might have to do something about him." Izuku could feel his blood run cold. He didn't know if he could handle the thought that he could be the reason a hero had to retire. Or something even worse, that he would need to. No, he could not let himself think about that. He wouldn't let that happen. "Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Then you can go back to your room. I will have someone get you if you're needed." "Understood, sir." And with that, Izuku turned and walked away. He could still feel his pulse beating a little too fast. He just had to hope he would never see 𝐬𝐻𝐻 again. The piece of paper felt heavy in his pocket. Maybe he really should throw it away. Although, for some reason, he really couldn't bring himself to do it. He just had to hide it really well. As he walked through the door to his room, he could hear the door shut and lock behind him. He was never allowed to walk around the building freely. Not since he had tried to escape that one time, or 2, or more like 20. Every time he hadn't gotten longer than 100 meters from the building before his wrist exploded in pain and someone came and dragged him back to his room. Not very pleasant. Now he was monitored 24/7. He knew they probably even had a camera in his bathroom. He had his own computer in his room, but it wasn't like he could do so much with it when everything was monitored. Search for the wrong thing and they would probably take it away. He used it mostly to keep updated on the latest news. They didn't want him to be completely oblivious to the world around him. After he had been on his computer for a few hours, he started to get restless. He tried to get some sleep but didn't have much luck. The majority of his assignment was during the night, so he mostly slept during the day. The few hours he could get some sleep at least. After a couple more hours, he heard the lock on the door open. He immediately stood up and waited for whoever it was to come in. It was his mentor Nakatani. "You have got another mission." "Yes, sir," and that was it. His rest was over, and he followed his mentor out the door. That was how his life continued for another 3 months, going on missions, being stuck in his room, and training. He was used to it by now. This was how it had been mostly all his life after all. He was now standing and waiting for Nakatani to give him his next mission. He had probably only slept about 5 hours the past 3 days, so he wasn't really that hyped to go out on yet another mission in such a small time space. Nakatani showed him a picture of a man, probably in his 30s. "You are to find this man, Moriko Oreo, and give him your usual encouragement. He hasn't paid back what he owed us for over 3 months. Make sure that he knows that if he doesn't pay up in 1 week, it will be dire consequences." "Yes, understood, sir." Izuku left, flying through the nearest window. When he was in the air, he quickly took out his phone, hacking into Moriko Oreo's bank account. Well, lucky him. He had just made a purchase at a convenience store not 5 minutes ago, and he had bought an apartment not far from there. He flew towards the convenience store and then started taking what would be the quickest way back to the man's apartment. He found him just turning into an alleyway. Izuku dropped down right behind the man, putting a hand on the man's shoulder. He slightly heightened the man's fear he was already feeling. When he turned around, he was practically shaking all over. "I hear you have an unpaid debt to return," Izuku said in a low voice. He was hoping this would be enough for the man to hurry up and pay back what he owed. He really didn't want to have to hurt the man. "You have 1 week to pay it back until I return." The man was, if possible, shaking even worse now. "I understand. I will get you the money." It was a miracle the man managed to get a word out at all with the panic he seemed to be in. Well, that should probably be enough, Izuku thought as he leaped up in the air, leaving the man shaking in his boots. Izuku was just flying back to base when he felt a tug at his ankle, and he was forced down on a roof. He managed to stick the landing with a neat roll, only to look around and find himself staring into the glowing red eyes of Eraserhead. "Hello again, kid." Izuku's blood ran cold, and his breath got stuck in his throat. "How? What? Why?" Izuku didn't know what to do. He had tried so hard to stay off any hero radars the past month. He guessed that in his sleep-deprived state, he had gotten sloppy. "Calm down, kid. I don't want to hurt you. I only want to help. That's not what I'm worried about." He didn't care if the hero would hurt him. The problem was that his tracker had shown him starting to head back. They would see his sudden stop and wonder what had caught his attention. He would soon be feeling the electricity from his wristband starting to increase. And that wasn't the worst part. He would have to say he had met Eraserhead again. What would they do when they found out? They wouldn't hurt him, right? Or worse, they wouldn't make him. No, stop thinking like that. It wouldn't help him in this situation. Then what is the problem? As I said, I can help you. You can help me by returning my quirk and letting me leave. How was he even going to get off the roof? Jumping without his quirk wasn't an option this time. He couldn't see any stairs down either. How had Eraserhead even gotten up here? "Sorry, I can't do that." "Can't you at least give me your name?" Izuku Midoriya. He was too tired to lie up some random name. I wasn't like Eraserhead could do anything with his real name anyway. He wasn't listed in any kind of records. His mother's name though, Midoriya. He maybe would be able to do something with that. Crap. He had to do some damage control later when he got back. "Alright, Izuku. Would you mind telling me how old you are too? If I do that, then will you let me leave?" Eraserhead sighed. "No, you know I can't do that." Well, he wasn't holding his breath for that one to work. "I'm 14 now." He didn't know what made him say it. Maybe it had something to with that the hero seemed to actually care. It was a long time since he had had a normal conversation with someone who wanted to know things about him. That was when he felt a strong jolt on his wrist. He couldn't help but hiss in pain and grab his wrist. Nakatani usually didn't up the voltage this fast. He must be in a bad mood. "Are you okay?" Eraserhead sounded worried. As the hero started to approach him, Izuku just stood rooted in place. He really should try getting away. But he was tired, and even if the pain should have woken him up, it only made it worse. He was too used to it by this point. Eraserhead had reached him now and tried taking his arm with the wristband. But when he made contact, he immediately jumped back with a yelp of pain. That made him lose focus on his quirk long enough for Izuku to snap out of his dozing and jump up in the air and fly away. He didn't dare look back toward the hero. Izuku flew in the same window he had let through earlier. Nakatani was waiting for him, looking sour. "Met with Eraserhead again, did we?" Izuku didn't know what to say. How had he already found out? And telling him your name too? Nakatani was shaking his head. You know he has to be dealt with now, right? Now Izuku was definitely freaking out. Will that really be necessary? It's not like he can do anything with it anyway. Before Izuku knew what had happened, he was lying on the floor with a sharp pain near his right eye. Are you disagreeing with me? Since you are the one who created this problem, then maybe it is best that you are the one who solves it. Izuku just kept his gaze on the floor. It was nothing he could do that would solve this problem. Not without landing him in the chair, or the water, or, no, it was best to just keep quiet. He would figure out what to do later. You can go back to your room in the meantime. Yes, sir, he told quietly as he quickly exited the room. 𝐲𝐸 was at a loss. He had managed to capture the kid and even gotten him to tell him his name and age. But he couldn't do anything with the information. No amount of searching got any hits on the name Izuku Midoriya. The name Midoriya got him some hits at least. But the only thing that name gave him was a woman named 𝐀𝐦 Midoriya who had disappeared without a trace 15 years ago. She was the right age to be the kid's mother, which didn't bode well. And even if it were Izuku's mother, it was a cold case with no more leads to follow. He had called Nezu again to see if he could find something. He couldn't, but no luck there either. The thing he was most worried about was when he touched the kid's arm. He had felt a strong jolt of electricity that made even him flinch. The second time he had met the kid, he had seen him rubbing his arm. Then he had only thought it was a nervous habit the kid did subconsciously. But now, was it some kind of punishment? Someone had seen him stopping, and the bracelet he was wearing was a way to make him do what they wanted. If that really was the case, he needed to find this kid quickly. Even though his patrol hours were technically over, he grabbed his phone and headed out. He wasn't going to be able to get any decent sleep now anyways. It wouldn't hurt to do something proactive instead. He jumped from roof to roof, stopping a few attempted thefts as he went. He also got some calls of small fights he had to break up. When the sun was starting to rise, 𝐲𝐸 was exhausted. He was just about to start heading home when he heard a small thud behind him. He quickly readied his capture weapon and turned around. So, you are the hero who has been putting his nose where it doesn't belong. What was he talking about? He was a hero. He had put his nose in many places where some people didn't want him. He would have to be a little more specific than that. What are you referring to? Poor Izuku will have to do something I'm sure he would rather have avoided. He did not sound like he felt sorry for Izuku, more like he would enjoy seeing the boy suffer. And Izuku, so that was what this was about. Where is he? Oh, you will meet him soon enough. Like I said, I have an assignment for him. 𝐲𝐸 did not like where this was heading at all. He activated his quirk and charged forward. It was unlikely that the man would give him any answers here. Maybe he would have more luck at the station. The man didn't seem nervous at all as 𝐲𝐸 started attacking. He was a skilled fighter, and 𝐲𝐸 started regretting not trying to get a few hours of sleep before he headed out again. He was being sloppy and had a hard time avoiding the man's attacks. Luckily, he hadn't had to blink yet, so he hadn't had to figure out what the man's quirk was yet. That, however, did not last long. As the man got a hit in on his glasses, he was forced to blink. That is when he felt all his strength leave his body. Like my quirk, it is called Drain, and with it, I can drain people's stamina after I have touched them. This wasn't good. 𝐲𝐸 didn't even have the energy to lift a finger. He could feel the man dragging him towards a wall and leaving him there. He could see the man bringing out his phone to call someone. Unlock the kid's cage. Tell him I have a surprise for him and to meet me at this location. He then hung up and looked towards 𝐲𝐸 again. Now we will just have to wait here. You should count your last breaths. Izuku immediately got a bad feeling as the lock on his door was open. He stood up anyways and waited for whoever would come through. It was Kurogiri. The Black Mist only did what others told him to do. Izuku guessed he was kind of similar to himself. Did they have some leverage on him too, or was he just a devoted follower? Izuku didn't think about it much. There was nothing he could do about it even if it would be true. Nagatani requests your presence at these coordinates. Kurogiri gave him a small piece of paper with some numbers on it and then turned around and walked away. Straight to the point as always. Izuku cautiously walked out into the hallway. He really had a bad feeling about this. Maybe he should just stay in his room and hope he could ignore the inevitable pain that would come. Although Izuku had never managed to do it before, so he had a small hope that he would succeed now. Instead, Izuku looked at the piece of paper and entered it into his phone. The coordinates were at a building not too far from here. Best to get it over with. Like ripping a band-aid, right? The faster you did it, the less painful it would be. He left and flew above the rooftops until he got to the right one. And as he arrived, he really wished he would have stayed in his room. Against a wall on the rooftop sat Eraserhead, completely defenseless. Izuku was pretty sure his heart stopped for a second. Here, Nagatani said as he handed him a knife. It is your problem, so it is your responsibility to deal with it. Izuku couldn't believe the next words that came out of Nagatani's mouth. Or maybe he just couldn't register them properly. It ended with Izuku just standing there looking at the knife. Did you hear me? Kill him. Kill. It was the one line Izuku had promised himself never to cross, no matter what they did. That was what he had said at least. But it was always easier to say something than to do it, or not at this instance. Because how would he get out of this one? When 𝐬𝐻𝐢 still didn't move, Nagatani took his hand and forced the knife into it. Should he maybe just throw the knife off the building? 𝐬𝐻𝐢 could barely resist laughing at his own stupidity. Wasn't he supposed to be smart? But his brain didn't want to cooperate right now. He was too stressed about this whole situation. Eraserhead was one of the best heroes out there. How had Nagatani taken him out so easily? Now Nagatani was starting to become restless. He pressed the controller that made the bracelet start to emit electricity. 𝐬𝐻𝐢 could barely feel it though. He was too lost in his own thoughts. 𝐬𝐻𝐢's lack of reaction seemed to infuriate Nagatani even more though, and 𝐬𝐻𝐢 fell to the ground screaming as the pain became unbearable. That however got a small reaction out from Eraserhead. "No, don't hurt him," Eraserhead said weakly. Shouldn't he be more worried about himself? 𝐬𝐻𝐢 had been ordered to kill him after all. He should hate him for putting him in this situation. The hero had only tried to help him and that would end up killing him. When the pain slowly subsided, 𝐬𝐻𝐢 slowly stood up. He held the knife in his right hand as he slowly started walking forward toward Eraserhead. And Eraserhead couldn't do anything else than just sit there. 𝐬𝐻𝐢 put himself behind Eraserhead with his left arm around his throat. He slowly brought the knife closer to Eraserhead's throat. Eraserhead still didn't say anything. Could he really just accept his fate that easily? That made 𝐬𝐻𝐢 sad. Sure, 𝐬𝐻𝐢's life was probably worse than his, but all pain was relative. Did the man not have anything worth at least putting up a fight for? Or did he somehow know? 𝐬𝐻𝐢 then quickly cut with the knife across Eraserhead's throat. At the same time, he made him calmer and calmer. He couldn't afford him freaking out now, even though he had been so calm before. Blood quickly started to flow out, but most of the blood didn't come from Eraserhead. It was coming from 𝐬𝐻𝐢. Because while 𝐬𝐻𝐢 had made a small cut on Eraserhead's throat, he had made a deep cut on his wrist. He still held it around Eraserhead's throat, letting his own blood make up for the lack of blood from Eraserhead. He would have to stop the bleeding fast after he removed his arm, or he would probably pass out from blood loss. He seemed to have been able to calm down Eraserhead enough for him to have fallen asleep. That was good. It probably helped that Nagatani had used his quirk on him before. Now he wouldn't have to worry about him screwing up his plan at least. Now he could only hope that Nagatani would fall for his ruse and that he would be able to hide his own bleeding arm. 𝐬𝐻𝐢 looked up at Nagatani to see his reaction, and he seemed pleased. "I feared you would not be able to do it. I'm glad you proved me wrong. I will leave you here now. I guess you still need some time. It is your first kill after all." 𝐬𝐻𝐢 could barely believe his ears. This was a better outcome than he could have hoped for. "Be back in your room in 15 minutes or you know what happens." He waved with the controller in the air as he walked off the roof. As soon as Nagatani was far away enough not to see, 𝐬𝐻𝐢 got to work. He took Eraserhead's knife and cut off a bit from his capture weapon. He then wrapped it hard around his wrist. He couldn't wrap it too hard. He didn't want to lose his hand to necrosis, but he couldn't wrap it too loosely either or he would probably bleed out. When he was finished or had done however much he could, he just sat there feeling a little dizzy. He probably already lost a substantial amount of blood. After a while, he tried standing up. He was supposed to be back in 5 minutes now. He couldn't stay here any longer. Should he do something about the Eraserhead? He shouldn't be injured too badly, but it might be dangerous to just leave him there. He looked through Eraserhead's pockets. He had to have a phone, right? And, sure enough, he found it in one of the front pockets. It didn't take long to crack the password. 𝐬𝐻𝐢 looked through his call history. He must have friends who are heroes too, right? It was none of the names that rang any bell to 𝐬𝐻𝐢. They must all be their civilian names. The one he had called most often was someone named Hisashi Yamada, and 𝐬𝐻𝐢 thought that would be the best bet. He clicked the call button and waited. When he heard someone pick up on the other side of the line, he only said Eraserhead needs medical attention and then hung up. They would have to find him on their own. After that, 𝐬𝐻𝐢 leaped up in the air and headed back to his room. When 𝐲𝐻𝐢 woke up, he was lying in a hospital bed. He could feel a faint pain over his throat, but besides that, he was feeling fine. Then why was he here? It then hit him. The kid. He had been ordered to kill him, forced to. But he hadn't done it. He had managed to trick whoever that other person was somehow. He didn't remember exactly what had happened, but that he was here was proof enough. When he looked around the room, he could see Yamada standing up from one of the chairs and heading over. When Yamada got close enough, he threw himself into a tight hug. "I thought you were dead when I arrived. There was so much blood." Yamada almost looked like he would start crying. "What happened? How did you know to find me?" For all Yamada should have been concerned, 𝐲𝐻𝐢 was supposed to be home sleeping at that time. "I got a call from your phone telling me you needed medical attention." "What? Who was it?" "Well, it sounded like a kid. The kid had even called for help. He wasn't even that heavily injured. From what Hisashi had told him about the amount of blood, the kid was probably way more injured than he was. Even despite that, he didn't leave without first making sure that 𝐲𝐻𝐢 would get help. They also wanted to pull you off the kid's case." "What? Why?" "They think you have gotten too personally invested in the case. And I can't really disagree. I mean, just look at where it landed you." 𝐲𝐻𝐢 couldn't believe his ears. Hisashi agreed with them. He, if anyone, should understand. He even sounded happy when he said he was taking on this case, and now he wanted him to just drop it. 𝐻𝐴𝐈 seemed to realize how angry 𝐲𝐸 had gotten, but instead of feeling sorry, he just sprung a small smile. That is why I volunteered to take it on with you. 𝐲𝐸 could kill him for making him worry like that. He could also groan at the fact that he would have to work with him on the case. 𝐻𝐴𝐈 was just too loud to work with, although he couldn't help the small part of him that was happy too. We can start working on it after school, where you can show me what you have got so far. But for right now, we should get back to our classes. Right, 𝐲𝐸 had totally forgotten about his classes. Someone must have filled in for his first few classes because it was a bit in the afternoon now. There were only a couple of days left until summer vacation, so the classes wouldn't be that hard. He was glad that 𝐻𝐴𝐈 hadn't tried getting him to stay in bed, even if he could see that 𝐻𝐴𝐈 still looked a little worried about him. 𝐲𝐸 had never been a person who liked staying in bed when there was work to be done. 𝐲𝐸 stood up from the bed and picked up his clothes that someone had hung on a chair. Let's go. What had he done? Izuku was very close to a panic attack, because what was he supposed to do now? He couldn't keep it a secret that Eraserhead wasn't dead. He was going to go back to hero work eventually. It wouldn't surprise Izuku if Nagatani already knew. There was also the problem that Nagatani had actually asked him to kill someone. Izuku could not stay here. He would not become the person they wanted him to be. It was time for Escape Plan 21. No matter how hard he thought, however, he could not come up with a decent plan. The problem was his wristband. Exclude the fact that he could be electrocuted any second with it on, it also had a tracker. He couldn't get anywhere where they would not find him. He also had his wrist to worry about. He had lost a lot of blood, and that made him tired and unable to think properly. The smartest would be to wait until it had recovered a bit, but he also needed to get away before they found out about Eraserhead. He couldn't try to figure out how to get the wristband off when he was in his room, or they would see. Perhaps if he managed to get out of there, he could try to figure it out later. He would be on a very small time limit, but he didn't have anything to work with in his room anyway. The second problem then, how to deal with the pain. He had been getting more and more used to the pain over the years, but he wasn't confident he would be able to control it. If anything, the pain would slow him down and make it harder to think of a way to get the wristband off later. He did have a quirk that allowed him to control force fields. He had mostly used it to create a shield in front of himself or others, but maybe he could make it smaller. Perhaps he could create a force field between his skin and the wristband that could block the electricity. It would take a lot of concentration though, and he couldn't practice without alerting them to his plan. He would also have to use multiple quirks at the same time too, both controlling the force field around his wrist and flying. He would also need to get away fast, which would require him to amplify his flying quirk. It was not going to be easy, but when had Izuku's life ever been easy? He just had to step up to the challenge. Using multiple quirks at once would exhaust him quickly, and he could not afford to pass out before he had gotten the wristband off. Izuku wasn't an optimist either. The next time the door opened, it was probably because they knew he had tricked Nagatani. He had to think of a plan fast. When it was getting close to nightfall, Izuku could hear angry footsteps outside his door. From the sound of it, it was Nagatani. Then he had been right, and he had found out. Izuku prepared himself mentally. This was going to be a taxing few minutes. He could hear the lock open and the door starting to open. At the same time that the door started to open, he made a blinding light coming from his hand. He could hear a grunt from Nagatani. Izuku then made the force field around his wrist, and not a second later he could hear electricity kicking to life in the bracelet. Luckily his plan seemed to work, and he couldn't feel any pain. He then made to rush past Nagatani. He could feel himself bumping and hard with him and a sharp pain in his stomach, but he managed to ignore it and continued running. Now there was nothing left to lose. He activated both his flying and amplifying quirk and zoomed through the corridor to the nearest window and smashed through. He was out. He was actually out. Of course, that was only the first part of the plan. Now he needed to find somewhere he could work on the bracelet. However, now that he was actually out of the building, some of the adrenaline started to wear off, and he could now fully feel the stabbing hot pain in his stomach. He looked down and could see a knife embedded there. That was not according to plan. He couldn't help but be a little impressed that Nagatani had been quick enough to pull out a knife after Izuku's surprise attack. Although for all Izuku knew, he had had it out all along and was coming to kill him right there in his room. That seemed highly unlikely though, since Izuku still was a powerful pawn for them and they wouldn't get rid of him that easily. Back to the problem at hand though. He had a knife in his stomach, and if he pulled it out, he would probably bleed out. And that was even excluding the fact that he had already lost a substantial amount of his blood already from the wound on his wrist. He wasn't going to be able to do this on his own. Should he go to a police station? No, they would probably only lock him up. He was a criminal after all. Izuku couldn't handle the thought of going from one prison to another. He would rather die than get locked up again. So, what was he supposed to do? He then remembered the small note in his pocket that he had gotten 3 months ago. Eraserhead had said he wouldn't arrest him, right? But not 24 hours ago he had almost slit his throat. Did the offer really still stand? From lack of better ideas, 𝐬𝐻𝐻 flew over to the nearest telephone booth. He almost passed out from the pain and blood loss when he landed but managed to stay awake. He started dialing the number on the piece of paper. He hesitated a few seconds before finally entering the last number. He could hear the tone starting to sound. Just when he was about to give up, a voice answered on the other line. 𝐲𝐻𝐻, what can I help you with? Said a tired voice on the other side of the phone. 𝐲𝐻𝐻. That must be Eraserhead's civilian name then, because he definitely recognized the voice. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 took a shaky breath. 𝐬𝐻𝐻. If you are still serious about helping me, I'm at a telephone booth in 𝐲𝐻𝐻. I will give you 20 minutes. If you are not here by then, I will expect your answer to be no. And then he hung up. He didn't have the energy to say anything more, and he didn't know if he would like the answer from the hero. Now he would just have to wait and see if it were Eraserhead or Nagatani who showed up. 𝐲𝐻𝐻 was sitting in Hisashi's kitchen trying to find anything that could help them understand the kid's situation better. His name is 𝐬𝐻𝐻 Midoriya then. Yes, that is what he told me. You are sure he didn't lie to you then? Of course, that was always a possibility, but the kid didn't seem like he was lying. He might be grasping for straws, but the kid almost looked like he was a little happy that he had asked for his name, that someone had cared enough about him to ask. That is what made 𝐲𝐻𝐻 sure. Yes, I'm sure he didn't lie. They went back and forth asking each other questions and trying to find any record of a kid named 𝐬𝐻𝐻 Midoriya. They also dug into the case of the disappearance of 𝐀𝐦 Midoriya, but there was not much to be found there. One day she had just been gone. A friend of hers named Mitsuki Bakugo had noticed her disappearance when she hadn't answered her phone for a couple of days. She had gone to her house, but no one had been there either. There hadn't been any sign of violence in her apartment, so there was not much to dig into. It was almost like she had left on her own accord, but who would leave without telling anyone? And 𝐀𝐦 didn't have any living relatives either, which meant there was no one else to ask. When they had been at it for hours, 𝐲𝐻𝐻 was starting to become really tired. He was just about to give up for the day and head home when his phone rang. Aren't you going to answer? It's an unknown number. I don't give out this number to just anyone. Well, it might still be important. That was true. It could also be someone who was not supposed to have this number and was trying to track his location. The curiosity took over though. And if there was someone he didn't recognize, he could just hang up before they got anywhere. 𝐲𝐻𝐻. What can I help you with? He could hear the intake of a shaky breath on the other side before the other person started talking. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 Midoriya. If you are still serious about helping me, I'm at a telephone booth in 𝐲𝐻𝐻. I will give you 20 minutes. If you are not here by then, I will expect your answer to be no. 𝐲𝐻𝐻 made to say something, but before he could, the kid hung up. His mind started racing. 𝐲𝐻𝐻 was a bit far away. Could he get there in 20 minutes? He started running to the door and put on his shoes. He had to hurry. Who was it? Where are we going? It was the kid. He actually called me. He's at a telephone booth in 𝐲𝐻𝐻. Well, then we better hurry. They raced towards 𝐲𝐻𝐻's car and jumped in. As soon as both car doors closed, 𝐲𝐻𝐻 pressed the gas pedal. He was not going to miss this chance. He drove through multiple red lights, but he didn't care. They could send him however many tickets they wanted if he could just get there in time. When he saw the telephone booth with a kid leaning against the wall, he jumped out of the car and sprinted the last bit of the way. The kid looked barely conscious, with blood coming out from a wound with a knife still in it. He needed to get the kid to a hospital, and soon. Hi 𝐬𝐻𝐻, I'm here. I will get you to a hospital. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 seemed to wake up a little more from that. It wasn't relief though, it was panic. No hospitals. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 took another shaky breath before he continued. There is a tracker in this. He held up his right arm and gestured to the wristband on it. I can't get it off. We can take him to UA. The defenses there disturb any trackers, and we can get Recovery Girl to look at him, Hisashi said as he came up from behind. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 didn't say anything against that idea, and 𝐲𝐻𝐻 nodded to Hisashi. Call Recovery Girl and make sure she is prepared. He then turned to 𝐬𝐻𝐻 again. Is it okay if I pick you up so that we can get you in the car? 𝐬𝐻𝐻 just nodded tiredly at him. 𝐲𝐻𝐻 bent down and put both his arms under 𝐬𝐻𝐻, lifting him up. He was careful so that he wouldn't disturb the knife. This time 𝐲𝐻𝐻 sat down in the back of the car with 𝐬𝐻𝐻 and let Hisashi drive the car. The drive to UA was much slower to avoid any bumps in the road. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 seemed unwilling to pass out and was stubbornly keeping his eyes open, breathing heavily. 𝐲𝐻𝐻 still couldn't believe he actually had the kid right here. It might not be under the best circumstances, but from here on out he would not let go of 𝐬𝐻𝐻 again. Whatever trouble the kid was in, 𝐲𝐻𝐻 was determined to help him. That is when he noticed the concentrated look on 𝐬𝐻𝐻's face. Are you using a quirk right now? He asked, looking at 𝐬𝐻𝐻. He nodded before answering. You know, firsthand, what this can do. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 gestured to the wristband. Now when 𝐲𝐻𝐻 looked closely, he could see a thin, shimmering-looking barrier underneath the wristband. It was on right now. He reached out to touch it and immediately felt a jolt of electricity, making him quickly pull away his hand. You are using a quirk to stop it from hurting. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 nodded again. Hisashi, can you give a call to Power Loader too? He should be able to do something about this. Sure thing. How long will you be able to continue using your quirk? He directed his question at 𝐬𝐻𝐻 again. I don't know. Exactly. I'm already well over my limit. Although since it's just a small shield, it's more mentally exhausting. Maybe 20 minutes, 𝐲𝐸 nodded. We will make that be enough time. When they arrived at UA, 𝐲𝐸 quickly picked up 𝐬𝐻𝐻 and headed toward Recovery Girl. She was standing ready for them next to a bed. 𝐲𝐸 gently put him down on the bed and took a few steps back, not wanting to be in the way. Oh dear, what has happened to you? Is there anything I should be aware of before I start treatment? Well, besides the obvious, you might want to take a look at this too. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 slowly lifted his left arm, which was wrapped in 𝐲𝐸's capture weapon. 𝐲𝐸 hadn't noticed that before. He had been too focused on the stab wound. That is when he remembered what Hisashi had said about the amount of blood that was by 𝐲𝐸 after he had found him, and he immediately understood. You cut up your own wrist to save me. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 looked away and nodded. I'm sorry. 𝐲𝐸 didn't understand what the kid meant at first. Was he sorry he had saved him? Or was he sorry he had hurt himself? Then he understood. The kid was sorry about hurting him. The thought was kinda ridiculous to 𝐲𝐸. The kid had saved him after all. It would be more logical for 𝐲𝐸 if he had actually been sorry for hurting himself, because that was 𝐲𝐸 a slightly bit angry about. Although the anger was more directed at himself. That was not your fault. You are a kid. You should not have had to be put in that kind of situation. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 still looked guilty about what had happened. That made 𝐲𝐸 even angrier. What had this kid been forced to do against his will? How long had he been under that man's control? And what is this? 𝐲𝐻𝐬 gestured towards 𝐬𝐻𝐻's other wrist with the wristband. A torture device put on the kid, 𝐲𝐸 said in a somber voice. Higari will be arriving any minute to take a look at it. Just as he said this, the door opened and Higari walked in. Is that the kid? He asked as he made to walk toward the bed. Yes, it is. Higari touched the band and quickly pulled back his hand again. Well, that will certainly cause some problems. Can you take it off? 𝐲𝐸 asked. That will take some time. I can make a small EMP and solve the problem for now. Okay, do it, and fast. Higari walked out the door again as 𝐲𝐻𝐻 started looking at 𝐬𝐻𝐻's wrist in the meantime. 5 minutes later, Higari returned with a small device. He put it on 𝐬𝐻𝐻's wristband and you could hear a small beep. That should take care of it for now. 𝐲𝐸 could hear a breath of relief as 𝐬𝐻𝐻 deactivated his quirk and fell unconscious. The combined strain from using his quirk for so long and blood loss would probably keep him under for a while. It was a miracle he had lasted this long. Now the rest of you get out so that I can treat my patient. All of them were practically being herded toward the door. 𝐲𝐸 didn't want to leave the kid, but he understood that there was nothing more he could do for now. He didn't put up a fight as Hisashi dragged him towards the sleeping quarters, which were located on campus, to get some rest. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 remained unconscious for the next few days. His quirk exhaustion made it impossible for 𝐲𝐻𝐻 to speed up his healing. But he had at least remained stable. Higari had managed to get the wristband off while 𝐬𝐻𝐻 was unconscious. It had been very high-tech and it took longer for him than 𝐲𝐸 was expecting. The kid must have been important to the villains. When he finally woke up, 𝐲𝐸 was already in the room. Due to summer vacation, he didn't have any classes to worry about. That allowed him to put all his focus on the kid. How are you feeling, 𝐬𝐻𝐻? The green eyes looked around the room. It seemed to take some time for him to remember where he was. When he did, though, he did not calm down. Instead, he jumped out of the bed and ran to the door. 𝐲𝐸 was just about to stop him from running away further when he stopped of his own accord. He had opened the door and looked out in the corridor. It opened. There was a look of pure confusion on his face. Why wouldn't it? 𝐲𝐸 walked towards him and made to put a hand on his shoulder. Before he could, though, 𝐬𝐻𝐻 flinched away. And 𝐲𝐸 didn't make another attempt at getting closer. Giving the kid space might be for the best for now. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 then looked down and lifted his right hand where the wristband had been. He fell to his knees and 𝐲𝐸 half expected him to start crying, but he didn't. It's off. You got it off. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 lifted his gaze and looked 𝐲𝐸 in the eyes and said thank you before turning away again. You should get back in bed. Recovery Girl hasn't been able to heal you because of your quirk exhaustion. Yes, sir. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 slowly stood up and walked towards the bed again. You can call me 𝐲𝐸. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 looked very uncomfortable with the thought of that. Or Aizawa, if that feels better. Okay. Aizawa. He still didn't look very comfortable with it, but it was at least progress. Do you want me to get you something to eat? The kid seemed to look to see if there was any trick involved. He looked cautiously at 𝐲𝐸, but when he didn't find any trickery, he slowly nodded. All right, I will go and see what I can find. Is it all right to be left here alone for a while? He got another careful nod from 𝐬𝐻𝐻 before he exited the room. He was heading towards the cafeteria when he bumped into Nezu on the way. The rat started walking beside him. I see the kid has woken up. Of course, the rat already knew. He probably had cameras set up in the hospital wing. No matter what happened in this school, Nezu already seemed to know about it. Yes, I was just about to bring him some food. What do you plan for the kid going forward? 𝐲𝐸 hadn't had time to think about that. He had been too focused on saving the kid. Now that he was here inside UA, safe, what would be the next step? He will still need to be protected. That was the one thing 𝐲𝐸 was sure of. Yes, there have been some strange people poking around outside UA's barrier. I cannot be sure if they have anything to do with young Midoriya, but it might be a good guess. Will you be the one to take care of him? That was not what 𝐲𝐸 had been planning. Would living with 𝐲𝐸 really be the best for the kid? 𝐲𝐸 could barely take care of himself and his cat. He had to admit, though, leaving the kid in the care of any of the other teachers scared him. Leaving him in foster care was a ridiculous idea, not even worth thinking about. I guess that will be for the best, he said with a sigh. It would not be ideal, however, perhaps for the best. Great, I already have the proper paperwork done, Nezu said in a chipper tone. 𝐲𝐸 again wasn't surprised. With the high IQ the rat had, of course he would be able to predict 𝐲𝐸's thought progress. 𝐲𝐸 was again happy that he was on the same side as the rat. He would not like to face him as an enemy. When they reached the cafeteria, they parted ways again, and 𝐲𝐸 brought some food back with him to the kid. Back in the room, 𝐀𝐦 had already started looking over Izuku, and when he entered the room, she turned toward him. Good, you brought food. She put a small table on the bed where 𝐲𝐸 could put the food. You eat that up and then I will start with some healing. Izuku just stared at the food for a while before he noticed that they were looking at him. He then slowly started to eat, still keeping a watchful eye on the rest of the room. 𝐲𝐸 understood that he might feel uncomfortable with him looking at him and sat down on a nearby chair and started scrolling through his phone instead. When he had finished, 𝐀𝐦 started clearing the food away and removed the small table. She then gave him a kiss on the cheek. Then she turned towards 𝐲𝐸 again. You can stay in here for 10 minutes, then I want you to let him rest. I understand. Looking satisfied, she left the room, leaving 𝐲𝐸 alone with the kid. Izuku was looking at him, looking like he wanted to say something. If you want to say something, just say it. What happens now? You will stay here until you are fully healed, and then you will be living with me. 𝐲𝐸 couldn't really say if the kid was happy about that or not. He almost seemed a little excited, but at the same time, he looked terrified. I almost killed you, Izuku said quietly. But you didn't. And I have already said that it wasn't your fault. And I don't blame you. I'm totally fine now. The worst that will come from it is a small scar. The kid still didn't look reassured by this. 𝐲𝐸 couldn't really blame him. He would be like that too. But he still hated that it was so hard for the kid to accept his words. He wanted to comfort him but didn't know how. When the kid didn't say anything more, 𝐲𝐸 just sighed. Well, I will leave you to get some more sleep. And then he left the room. Izuku remained in bed for 2 more weeks before he was allowed to move around again. He thought the time was excessive, but Recovery Girl kept going on about reckless teenagers and stupid habits of getting into trouble before fully healed. She also wanted to make sure he ate properly because apparently he was slightly underweight. It wasn't like he hadn't been given enough food in his imprisonment. They wanted him to work in peak condition after all. It was just the strain from training and the stress of missions that left him unable to eat sometimes. The care he was getting at UA was so foreign to him. Recovery Girl was always hovering above him when he was eating to make sure he ate enough. Present Mike, or Yamada, which he insisted he called him, came by sometimes, making sure he wasn't bored. It was mostly him talking and Izuku just listening, but it was still nice. Aizawa was almost always sitting in the corner of the room keeping an eye on him. He didn't talk as much as Yamada did, but his presence was somehow comforting. He had tried asking him about what he thought were his kidnappers, but Izuku hadn't said much. They had been so kind to him, and he didn't want them to find out that he was the son of the biggest villain in quirk history. Would they still want to help him then? Izuku didn't dare find out, and now he was supposed to start living with 𝐲𝐸. Izuku had really no idea how he felt about that. On the one hand, it was the eraser head. On the other hand, he had almost killed him and Aizawa had a scar to show it. Even if Aizawa had said multiple times that he didn't care about that, Izuku couldn't stop thinking about it. Izuku had done a lot of bad things over the years. Most of the quirks he had gotten from kids he had kidnapped. How was he supposed to feel about that? What was he supposed to do about it? It wasn't like he could return them. He didn't have that power. Izuku was so lost in thought that he almost didn't realize Aizawa had asked him a question. Are you ready to go, Izuku? Yes, sir. Yes, Aizawa. Aizawa just sighed at him and led him out the door. Izuku still hadn't got rid of the habit of calling him sir. Every time he had accidentally said Nagatani instead of sir, he had gotten a punch in the face for not showing respect. Let's just get you in the car. The car ride to Aizawa's house was quiet, but when they opened the door, they were with a screaming orange cat. Izuku bent down and let the cat sniff his hand before it started rubbing its head against his leg. That's 𝐀𝐦. She will be happy with a little extra attention. As Aizawa said that, 𝐀𝐦 started climbing up in Izuku's lap, purring. Seem like she likes you, he said with a small smile on his face. What am I supposed to do? Izuku started to freak out a little. He had never had a cat this close before. Just pet her and she will be happy. Now Aizawa was definitely laughing. Izuku started petting her. 𝐀𝐦 also helped by rubbing her head against his hand when he brought it down. You can pick her up and bring her in. How do I hold her? Aizawa sat down beside him and showed him how to properly pick her up. When 𝐀𝐦 was securely in his arms, he carefully started heading inside. Aizawa led him to a fairly large room with a bed and a desk but not much else. This will be your room. You can decorate it however you want. We can go out shopping tomorrow for whatever supplies you need, thank you, 𝐬𝐸 as he carefully headed inside and sat on the bed with 𝐀𝐦. I will be in the kitchen if you need anything. Aizawa turned around and was just about to close the door. No, 𝐴𝐸, can you please leave the door open? 𝐬𝐸 could not bear the thought of being locked inside again. Even if the room was fairly big, he still wanted to know that he could leave whenever he wanted to. Yes, of course. Aizawa made to leave again, but this time he left the door wide open. With 𝐀𝐦 purring on his lap and hearing Aizawa working in the kitchen, 𝐬𝐸 thought that maybe this really could be his new home. Air. 𝐬𝐸 needed air, but he couldn't breathe. There was water all around him. If he breathed, he would get water in his lungs. Just when he thought he couldn't hold his breath anymore, he was brought to the surface and managed to take one deep breath before he was brought under again. It continued like that again, and again, and again, and 𝐬𝐸 woke up gasping for air. 𝐲𝐸 was rushing through the door trying to calm him down. Calm down, you can breathe, 𝐬𝐸. Listen to my breathing in and out. They continued like that for a few minutes before 𝐬𝐸 calmed down enough to breathe normally again. Another nightmare. Aizawa looked at him with concern. 𝐬𝐸 just nodded, not trusting his voice enough to talk. 𝐬𝐸 had been having nightmares every other night for the past month that he had been living here. Aizawa had tried the best he could to make him calm down after he woke up like that, which 𝐬𝐸 was very grateful for. I will go start on our breakfast, Aizawa finally said and stood up. In his place on the bed, 𝐀𝐦 jumped up and started to cuddle up against 𝐬𝐸. When 𝐬𝐸 could start smelling bacon and scrambled eggs from the kitchen, he walked out of his room, plopping down by the dining table. He got a plate and a glass of orange juice when Aizawa was done. Are you sure you are fine with being with Nedzu when I teach? 𝐬𝐸 nodded. With the summer break over, Aizawa had to go back to teaching and he didn't want to leave 𝐬𝐸 alone in the apartment. He was also supposed to do a test made by Nedzu to see how far he was academically. I will be fine, alright then, let's get ready. We might be a little early, but I'm pretty sure Nedzu lives in the school, so he won't mind. 𝐬𝐸 helped Aizawa put away the dishes from breakfast and got dressed. When 𝐀𝐦 realized they were preparing to leave, she tried to stop them by walking in their way or laying down on their shoes. 𝐬𝐸 bent down and petted her. We will be back soon, I promise. Before he quickly stepped out the door and closed it behind him. Ah, you must be young Midori I have heard so much about. Yes, sir. No, Nedzu will do just fine. Here, follow me. Nedzu shoved him to a desk with pencils and paper already prepared. 𝐬𝐸 sat down and waited for future instructions. I'm sure Aizawa has already informed you of the purpose of this test. Yes, he has, that's great. Nedzu walked back to his own desk and sat down. You will have 3 hours to complete the questions. If you run into any problems, it is only for you to ask. As Nedzu said that, he turned on a timer. 𝐬𝐸 turned his attention to the questions. The first questions 𝐬𝐸 guessed were about grade school material, and then they gradually got harder. He worked diligently and after 2 hours he was finished and turned to Nedzu. Already finished, are we? 𝐬𝐸 nodded and Nedzu jumped down from his chair, walking over. He quickly looked over the answers and later put them on his own desk. Very impressive, I must say. I can't find anything wrong with your answers, and they were all the way up to the high school level. Most impressive indeed. Do you mind if I ask you a few more questions? No, that's fine. They ended up talking for the last hour until 𝐬𝐸 was released for lunch. He got some quick instructions on how to find the cafeteria before he left. The school was huge, and it would have been hard to find your way around without some instructions. When he arrived at the cafeteria, he didn't know what to do. It was just so big and had so many students walking around. 𝐬𝐸 wasn't used to such a big crowd. The last month he had spent mostly alone with only Aizawa and 𝐀𝐦, and before that, well, he hadn't exactly been allowed to socialize. In other words, he ended up just standing in the doorframe, probably looking like a fool. That is until a tall boy with blonde hair walked up to him. Hello there, I'm Mirio Tagata. Aizawa asked me to make sure you got something to eat. And with that, 𝐬𝐸 was dragged to the waiting line to get food. When they had gotten their food, Tagata led him towards a table with 2 other students. Midoriya, this is 𝐁𝐲 Hado, and Tamaki Amajiki. 𝐁𝐲. Tamaki, this is 𝐬𝐸 Midoriya. Hello, 𝐬𝐸. I'm 𝐁𝐲. What is your quirk? It doesn't look to be a mutant type. How old are you? Do you also want to be a hero? Are you Aizawa-sensei's kid? Or maybe his nephew, or are you his younger brother? 𝐬𝐸 didn't even know where to start. There were a lot of those questions he didn't feel comfortable answering or didn't know the answer to. I'm not related to Aizawa. I'm just living with him now because of circumstances I don't really feel comfortable talking about. 𝐬𝐸 felt a little awkward not answering the other questions, but before he could start overthinking it, Tagata jumped in and saved him. Sorry about her, Midoriya. She can be a little much the first time you meet her. You don't have to answer the other questions if you don't want to. She has probably already forgotten half of them herself already. Izuku relaxed a little after that, and the rest of the lunch went by with Tagada and Hado talking the most. 𝐴𝐻𝐸 didn't say much. He looked more like he would want to hide under the table, but he still seemed to enjoy listening to them. Izuku thought it was nice too. It was nice being part of a conversation with no pressure on himself. When it was almost time for classes to start again, they stood up and cleaned away their trays. Izuku didn't really know what to do now. Aizawa hadn't said anything about what he would do after he met Nezu. Tagada seemed to realize his hesitance and spoke up. "Oh, right, I almost forgot. Aizawa told me to bring you back to class after. You were allowed to watch us train if you wanted." Okay, Izuku started following Tagada back to class. He noticed that Hado and 𝐴𝐻𝐸 were starting to head in another direction. "Aren't you coming?" he asked. "No, we are in a different class actually. Mirio is in 1B, and Tamaki and I are in 1A. But we will definably see each other at dinner tomorrow too, right?" She seemed really excited by the idea. Izuku really couldn't understand why. They just met and he had barely said anything. Sure, I think so. Great, then see you tomorrow." And with that, they parted ways. Aizawa was waiting for them outside the classroom when they arrived. He looked relieved that Tagada had found him and taken care of him. "Thanks for bringing him, Tagada. You can head inside the classroom." "Yes, Mr. Aizawa." Tagada slipped through the door, leaving only Izuku and Aizawa in the hallway. "Are you sure you will be fine with looking at the other students? I don't want you to have some kind of panic attack." "Yes, I'm sure." Aizawa sounded stern when he asked, but Izuku could see he was just worried. It was almost like he was scanning him, looking for any kind of lie in his body language. After a while, he just sighed. "If you are sure, just remember, if you see anything triggering, tell me right away." With that, they followed Tagada inside the classroom. Izuku really didn't understand what Aizawa was so worried about. Sure, he had had some nightmares and woken up in a panic attack, but that was it. He was used to action, and if anything, the last month had been kind of boring, but he guessed, in a good way. "Change to your hero costumes, then meet me at ground gamma." There was a sound of chairs scraping off the floor as the students stood up and headed towards the changing rooms. Izuku could see that the students had a deep respect for Aizawa, and in some cases even some fear. He couldn't help wondering why. Aizawa might be strict, but how scared could you be of someone who always looked half asleep? Izuku followed Aizawa towards ground beta. Ground gamma looked like a big industrial site with a lot of pipes and cranes. It was almost like a big labyrinth. After a while, the other student also started arriving. It was interesting looking at the other students' hero costumes. Izuku couldn't help to try and guess the other quirks based on their hero costumes. Some had mutant types, which made it easy to guess, and others had just a normal suit that didn't tell him much about their quirk. Tagada had a big 1 million written across his chest. Izuku wondered if it was something about his quirk or just something personal. He would have to ask him later. Izuku was so deep in his own thoughts that he got a little startled when he felt a small nudge in his side. It was Aizawa, who was looking at him with an unreadable expression. "However interesting your thoughts are, you might want to keep them to yourself when I am trying to explain the exercise." That is when Izuku realized he had been talking out loud. He could feel his face getting red. He had had a habit of doing that when he was little, but that was before he was afraid to make any unnecessary sounds. He couldn't really say he was happy that that habit was starting to return. "Like I was saying, we are going to be doing an exercise similar to capture the flag, if any of you are familiar with it. You will split into 2 teams with 10 people on each team. You will then secretly hide a flag on your respective sides. It is then your mission to find the other team's flag and bring it to your own side." Aizawa brought out a bunch of capture tape. "You are free to use your quirks, and if you are over on the other team's side, you can be captured with the help of this capture tape. If you are captured, you are brought to a prison located in the middle of each side. You can rescue captured teammates by reaching the prison and bringing at most 2 teammates back to your own side. Do you understand the training exercise?" There was a chorus of yes, and after that, the teams were divided and started hiding their flag. As the training started, Izuku looked on intently. It was incredible watching the heroes use their quirks. Some quirks he had guessed, but others were completely different. Tagada seemed to have some kind of quirk that made him pass through objects and people, although he didn't have the best control over it. There were a lot of times when he almost got stuck in a wall halfway through. It must be a very hard quirk to control. After a while, he saw a student with a quirk that made his heart instantly beat faster. He had a quirk that allowed him to control water. He had just destroyed a container filled with water and used it to drive the other students away. All Izuku could think of was his recurring dream about not being able to breathe. The dream he had come from one of his many types of punishments or a way to keep him in line. He could feel his breathing starting to become uneven and shallow. He knew he had to breathe, that he could breathe. He wasn't underwater, he was safe next to Aizawa. His brain didn't seem to understand that though, and his breathing only started to get worse. Aizawa had seen what was happening now, and he tried to calm him down without much luck. Izuku could barely hear what he said. He was too focused on trying to breathe, but he didn't have any luck with that either. When after a couple of minutes with no success in calming down, he could feel himself losing consciousness. And then everything became black. When Izuku woke up, he was lying in Recovery Girl's office. He looked around the room and found Aizawa looking at him from across the room. "I told you to tell me if you saw anything triggering." "I know, I'm sorry. You know this could have been avoided if you would tell me what all those nightmares are about." That was true. The times he had had his nightmares, Aizawa just helped him calm down without asking about it later. Izuku really appreciated Aizawa not asking too much about them. He didn't really feel comfortable talking about it. That would require him to talk about his treatment before and maybe why he had been treated like that. Aizawa seemed to notice his discomfort and tried to explain. "You don't need to go into specifics, not right now at least. I only want to know what kind of things could be triggering for you so we can try to avoid a repeat of today. I, for example, understand that you don't like small or locked rooms." That was also true. In the month he had been living with Aizawa, he hadn't once even closed his door a single time. It wasn't even a lock on the door, which made it kind of silly. But the thought of him not being able to open it after it closed scared him. He never wanted to get locked in again. "Water. I think it was the water. That is what I dream about." Aizawa sighed. It wasn't one of his bored sighs, but rather of relief. It almost looked like a small weight had been lifted off his shoulders, and Izuku couldn't help feeling a little guilty for being the cause of that weight in the first place. "Thank you. I will keep that in mind from now on. Do you think you are ready to head home?" Izuku nodded and stood up. They walked to the car and started driving. It was quiet for a while before Aizawa spoke up. "I heard it went well on the test from Nedzu." "I guess so." He could see Aizawa hesitating a little before he continued. "He has volunteered to teach you if you want. It will only be 2 or 3 times a week in that case. I don't know how I feel about you spending so much time alone with him, but it's your choice." "You don't like him?" Aizawa almost laughed a little at that. "Don't get me wrong, he is really smart. Perhaps a little too smart for his own good. The problem is that he can be a little crazy sometimes. It scares me a little what he might try to teach you." Izuku thought it was a little funny seeing Aizawa be so uncomfortable about a literal rat. It might be interesting seeing how smart he actually was. It wasn't like he could be worse than his last teacher. "I think I will give it a try." Izuku didn't have a nightmare that night, and when they had eaten breakfast they left for school. Izuku couldn't help but be a little excited. He had met nice people who wanted to see him again, and he would get to learn from one of the smartest beings in Japan with no pressure on himself. When he got to Nedzu's office, Nedzu immediately jumped off his stool to come and meet him. He had already prepared a seat for Izuku with a computer. "Ah, young Midoriya. I was pleased to hear you took me up on my offer." Izuku didn't really know what to say, so he just nodded and continued inside the room. "Now I have already seen your academic prowess, so I thought we could test something else today." He brought him to the seat with the computer and gestured for him to sit down. "I read your file, and I saw that you had managed to hack into some very well-protected hero agency's servers." Izuku froze a second after hearing that. He was expecting a scolding. Maybe he hadn't read his file before his test yesterday, and now he had regretted his decision. He would get sent to prison for his crimes, which Izuku was afraid they would do from the start, and he would have to live the rest of his life behind bars. And maybe, no need to look so afraid. I was just impressed by your success. Now I would like you to try and hack into UAS servers. Wait, what? He wasn't mad. He was even impressed. And he even wanted him to do it again. That was, definably not the kind of lessons Izuku was expecting. I have already taken the liberty to prepare a computer. Now you may start whenever you're ready. Izuku hesitated for a few seconds. Perhaps this was just a test. A test to see how dangerous he actually was. If he actually did it, that would be when they sent him away. When Izuku looked up at Nedzu, though, he could see the excitement in his eyes. Even if it was harder to see since he was an animal, it was still there. Izuku then understood. He actually wanted him to do it. He even hoped he would succeed, and Izuku thought, well, let's not disappoint him then. Izuku opened the computer and started. Izuku, I was worried about you. Mirio said Aizawa had to carry you away from their training yesterday. Izuku was a little overwhelmed by the cheerful greeting. He was back in the cafeteria and was just about to sit down with Tagada, Amajiki, and Hado when Hado jumped up and almost hugged him. She would have if Izuku didn't jump away just in time. He wasn't too fond of physical contact, or at all. Yeah, I just got a little lightheaded, I guess. He scratched his neck trying to play it away. He didn't want them to know he passed out due to a panic attack. I heard you were having a lesson with Nedzu today. How was it? Tagada must have had a superpower that allowed him to see when people were uncomfortable and save them. Yes, I did. It was fun. Really? What did you do? Hado almost jumped up and down in her seat from excitement. I hacked into UA. Next to him, Amajiki dropped his chopsticks in surprise. You succeeded with hacking into UA? He asked quietly. Well, yes. It was hard and took some time, but yes, in the end, I did it. I want to go home. Oh, come on, Tamaki. I mean, that is amazing, Midoriya. I bet Nedzu was surprised. Yes, a little. I think he kind of expected it though. Izuku didn't know if he should be worried about Amajiki's depressing demeanor or laugh at him because of it. Though he probably would laugh, if he were able to, because judging from Tagada and Hato's reaction, this was nothing new to them. What are you going to do after lunch now? Are you coming to our training today? Hato looked excited about the thought. I mean, since you were at Tagada's yesterday. No, Aizawa didn't think it was a good idea for me to be in your training. I will just look around campus. Oh, that's too bad, but we will see you tomorrow at lunch again, right? Yeah, sure. We better head off to our lessons. See you tomorrow, Midoriya. With that, they all stood up from the table and headed their respective ways. Izuku didn't really know what to do now. Aizawa had said he could do whatever he wanted as long as he stayed on campus. The UA barrier would probably not even let him leave. He was still a villain after all. Although he had already proven that he could hack into UA, so technically he could leave if he wanted to. He started just aimlessly going around, not knowing what to do. UA was really big and there was a lot to see, so he managed to entertain himself until the afternoon lessons were finished. Aizawa was waiting for him to leave when he got back. They sat in the car and drove home. Home. It really had become his home, hadn't it? He was still a little unsure about his situation. He was still worried that Aizawa would realize what he had actually done and leave him. Would he still take care of him if he knew who his father was? Izuku didn't want to think about that. Right now, Aizawa had taken care of him and he had a home. Maybe he could be safe here. At least that was what he thought. I can't believe you managed to hack into UA, Aizawa said as they were heading from the car towards the house. Is that a bad thing? Aizawa laughed at him, actually laughed at him. Tagada had thought it was amazing that he had managed to hack into UA, but he was a student. Aizawa was a teacher. He should be worried that a 13-year-old could hack into one of the most secure servers in Japan, not laugh at him for it. What? No. It might be a little worrisome that you succeeded. Nenzu is very proud of UA's security, although he is probably happy about the challenge to upgrade it now. They were almost at the door when Aizawa stopped abruptly and put a hand out for Izuku to stop. Izuku looked at the door and saw it too. The door was slightly open. Someone had broken in, and with Izuku's luck, it was Nagatani who had found him. I will go in first. You stay here. And with that, Aizawa had gone through the door and Izuku was left standing there alone. He tried to listen in case he could hear any fighting break out. Izuku had only been here for a month, but it had started to feel like home. He liked it here. He started to feel safe. Now this, he would only cause problems, and after this Aizawa would see that. He was bound to be left on the streets now, or worse, in prison. He was so completely lost in thought that he barely had time to dodge when a fist aimed at him appeared. He managed to jump away just in time and swirl around. Looks like you have gotten a little rusty the past 2 months. It was Nagatani. He had found him. Izuku backed away a few more steps, putting some distance between them. He couldn't leave another opening for Nagatani to touch him, or he would lose. That you would be so desperate to ask the help of a hero. Does he even know half the things you have done? Izuku knew he was only trying to get into his head and distract him. That, however, didn't mean it didn't work. It was true after all. Izuku hadn't talked or confessed anything he had done. Aizawa didn't know the horrible person he was, the horrible things he had done. Do you really think he would help you if he did? No, he didn't. That was why he hadn't said anything. It had been so nice to just be able to take it easy, to have people who cared for him. He had even kind of gotten friends. Of course, they were only his friends because Aizawa had asked them to look after him and they didn't know who he was. He heard some shuffling from inside the house. Aizawa must have bumped into some of Nagatani's men. Izuku couldn't get distracted now. Even if everything Nagatani said was true, if he didn't do anything now, he might put Aizawa in danger again. Do you really think you can beat me on your own? The only reason you have won before is because you cheated with the wristband, but guess what? I don't have that anymore. It took all his self-control not to shake or sound afraid. He had never spoken up against Nagatani before. Right now, though, he was determined. He would not go back. He put himself in a battle-ready stance. I see you have actually grown a spine. And no, I don't plan to beat you on my own. As he said this, 3 more people stepped out. All of them had some kind of ranged quirk. One had a turtle quirk that could make small orbs that made anything that got stuck in them slow down. Another had a fire quirk, and the last one had a lock-on quirk that could make anything he threw hit his target. The next few minutes were mostly Izuku trying to dodge. He was fairly confident in his fighting ability, but he was not used to fighting this many opponents at once. He knew he could just fly away if he wanted to, but he couldn't just leave this to Aizawa. He hadn't had his capture weapon equipped when they were driving home, and he wasn't made to fight large groups of villains either. It was hard keeping track of all the quirks. Nagatani wanted to get close to touch him while the others wanted to keep away. It was hard seeing where the turtle quirk's orbs were. There was only a slight distortion in the light that gave a clue to where they were. Even if he managed to dodge the fire directly, it still burned. He couldn't just dodge either with the one with the lock-on quirk when he threw things. He had to destroy them. Izuku didn't want to use all his quirks either. It would be hard to explain to Aizawa how he could use multiple quirks and how he had gotten them. Aizawa had already seen him fly and use force fields, and they were the quirks he tried to rely on mostly. He also had a weak strength enhancer quirk that could mostly go unnoticed. That would require him to get in close though. When he felt his stamina starting to run out, he became desperate. He amplified his quirks and lunged for the ranged fighters. He used his mother's quirk to pull the one with the lock-on quirk slightly off balance before punching him in the face, making him pass out. Izuku's mother hadn't focused much on developing her quirk, and it only allowed her to pull small objects under 5 kilograms towards her. Since it was the first Izuku had gotten, he had trained a lot with it. Without empowering it with his own quirk, he could pull as heavy objects as full-grown men. With enough amplifying though, it could be used as full-blown telekinesis. That took a lot of stamina though, and he didn't want to risk using that if Aizawa would come out. He had managed to take out one of the guys and continued to do the same thing with the one with the turtle quirk. When he was knocked out, Izuku thought his quirk would disappear too and became careless. He jumped backward and his foot got stuck. He could still move it, but way too slowly. He put the force field all around himself as the one with the fire quirk unleashed a bright flame that surrounded him. The force field held, but the fire burned up all the oxygen and it still became too hot. Izuku was forced to drop it. Just as he did that, the fire stopped and Nagatani's hand touched his arm. Game over, Izuku. Izuku could feel his strength starting to drain, but suddenly it just stopped. He looked towards the house and saw Aizawa standing there. He had a deep cut under his right eye, but besides from that, he looked fine. He had apparently found his capture weapon, and it was now floating around his neck as his red eyes stared down at Nagatani. Not as long as I'm standing. As Aizawa said this, he used his capture weapon to wrap around the fire user. He pulled him towards him and knocked him out too. Before he could get Nagatani through, a purple mist appeared. Well, I'm clever enough to know when a fight is lost, he said as he stepped through the portal and disappeared. Aizawa started running towards him. Are you all right, Izuku? Yes, I'm fine. Thanks, 𝐲𝗏. 𝐲𝗏 stopped from looking over him after his injuries. Izuku didn't know what made him able to call him that. Izuku knew he was lying and that it would probably be different if he knew what he had done. But right now, he was taking care of him. He had saved him even though he knew some of the things he had done. For a second, when 𝐲𝗏 didn't do anything, Izuku feared he had gotten mad. He was just about to apologize when he felt warm arms around him. His first instinct was to pull away. He still wasn't fond of physical contact. Right now though, it was fine. Izuku relaxed and let 𝐲𝗏 hug him. After a while, 𝐲𝗏 pulled away. Can you stand? 𝐲𝗏 asked as he stood up and reached out a hand to help Izuku up. Izuku hesitated before taking it and letting 𝐲𝗏 pull him up. He felt dizzy for a second but still remained standing. Yeah, I think so. Take anything you need from the house and then wait for me in the car. 𝐲𝗏 had gone back to business mode again and had brought out his phone to call Nezu. He was also starting to tie up the knocked out villains. Izuku went to his room. He still didn't have many belongings. He took his computer, notebooks, and some other small things. He also had to search the hose after 𝐀𝐦. She seemed to have gotten scared and was hiding under the sofa, but when she heard Izuku's voice, she came out. He picked her up and headed to the car. After a few minutes, 𝐲𝗏 also jumped into the car and started driving toward UA again. They went straight to Recovery Girl's office when they arrived. She checked them over. They had no major injuries. Izuku had some burns and were exhausted, but nothing worse. 𝐲𝗏 would get a scar under his right eye. Izuku couldn't help but feel guilty about it. That was the second scar 𝐲𝗏 had gotten because of him. When they were free to go, 𝐲𝗏 took them to a room inside UA. We will stay here for now. Nezu will have a house built for us inside the campus later. I'm sorry, Izuku looked at the floor. I'm only causing you problems. 𝐲𝗏 bent down on one knee, looking him in the eye. This is not your fault. I'm a hero and it's my job to protect you. Even if it wasn't, I would still help you. Do you know why? Izuku shook his head, not knowing what to say. Because you are a good kid. And you don't deserve anything that has happened to you. 𝐀𝐦 mewed as to agree with 𝐲𝗏, and Izuku cried. For the first time in years, he cried. There was no other way to express what he was feeling. He could feel 𝐲𝗏 embracing him again. And for the first time, Izuku felt safe. Izuku was bored. For the past 5 months, he had only been allowed to be inside UA barriers. He had continued to have his lessons with Nezu, which continued to be interesting. For the rest of the day, though, he had not much to do. He had started training and jogging around campus. He had also gotten permission from 𝐲𝗏 to use UA's gym, but you could only train so much. The rest of the time, Izuku had only explored the UA campus, and sure, it was big, but not that big. He already felt like he had seen everything and was beginning to feel a little trapped. Can't I just be allowed to go out for an hour and jog or something? No, you know very well why that is a bad idea. Izuku had already asked 𝐲𝗏 this multiple times, and the answer was always the same. 𝐲𝗏 had become a little overly protective science after the incident at their last home. He still didn't let him watch lessons of fear that he would have panic attacks. And sure, he had had more panic attacks than he would like to admit, but he had to get over it sometime, right? 𝐲𝗏 also did not like the idea of him leaving UA's protective barrier. So, you are also going to lock me in just like they did. It was a low blow. Izuku knew that, but he was getting desperate. He couldn't take being stuck here for another month. It was not remotely as bad as it had been before, but then he had been let out to fly around when he was doing missions once in a while. 𝐲𝐸 sighed a deep sigh. I will allow it if you have a tracker with you. Oh, how original of you. Izuku couldn't help the sarcasm. It was just amusing how so much had changed but still remained the same. It will not be on all the time. You can activate it if you get in trouble. Is that fine? 𝐲𝐸 sounded tired. That made Izuku feel a little guilty. 𝐲𝐸 didn't have to protect him after all. Izuku was only an extra burden on him, and Izuku was very grateful that 𝐲𝐸 stood out with him. Yes, that will be fine. I will ask 𝐲𝐸 to make it for you, and when it's finished you can go. Thanks. How is fatherhood treating you, 𝐲𝐸? You seem a little tired. I'm not his father, Hisashi. 𝐲𝐸 was sitting in the teacher's lounge. He was still thinking about what Izuku had said. He knew the kid didn't mean it, but it was still frustrating being compared to villains. He was also worried about letting the kid go outside UAS barrier. 𝐲𝐸 knew the kid could take care of himself. He had shown that many times. That didn't make him worry less though. Something could still go wrong. He guessed he really was becoming the kid's father. I can fix that. I already have adoption papers prepared, Nezu said with a smug grin. At least that's what 𝐲𝐸 thought. It's hard to tell since he's an animal. 𝐲𝐸 would be lying if he said he hadn't considered it. He had actually thought about it a lot. He had really grown fond of the kid. He still suspected it was too soon for the kid though. 𝐲𝐸 could tell he was keeping secrets. He still didn't really know what the kid's quirk was. He had seen him both fly and use force fields. It could be a versatile quirk or two separate quirks. 𝐲𝐸 had tried asking Izuku about it a few times, but he seemed unwilling to tell. That was fine with 𝐲𝐸. He could give the kid all the time he needed. He only hoped he would open up about his past and quirk someday. I think that will have to wait. He tried sounding bored, but he could see what he guessed was still a smug grin on the rat. I understand. I will keep them for now. Higari, can you make a small tracker for the kid? Sure, I can have it ready in 3 days. Getting a little overprotecting, are we? It was Nemuri this time. He was getting tired of the teasing, so he just stood up and walked out of the room. He could still hear muffled laughing as he left. They were all hopeless. 3 days later, Izuku was walking out of UA with a brand new clock on his wrist that had a small button on the side that would activate the tracker and send a signal to 𝐲𝐸. He started to just aimlessly jog around town. It felt like there was so much to see. He hadn't been out much during the day before when there were a lot of other people walking around. It was a weekday, however, and not as many people as it could have been, which Izuku was happy for. That changed, however, when it was time for school and most jobs to end. Suddenly there were a lot more people walking around. Izuku tried to avoid the most bustling streets as much as possible. That led him through a rather dark underpass. He was halfway through when he heard a strange sound behind him. He turned around and saw a green sludge emerge from the sewer. You will make a perfect skin suit for me to hide in, kid. This was just his luck. On the first day outside the UA protective barriers, and he was already being attacked by a villain. Of course, the villain didn't seem to recognize him and were probably not specifically after him. That was something at least. As the villain lunged for him, he just jumped to the side. A slippery one, the villain said as he lunged again. Izuku wasn't really afraid. The villain was slow and easy to dodge. He didn't even have to use his quirks but just jumped to the sides. The problem was, he couldn't continue like this. Should he try to capture him himself or try to lead him toward a hero? 𝐲𝐸 would never let him out again if he found out about this. Then perhaps he should try to capture him himself and turn him over to the police. That thought hadn't even properly formed before someone else jumped out of the sewer. Have no fear, you're safe. Now that I'm here, that is. The sludge froze for a moment before trying to attack the new arrival. It didn't last long though, and after a Texas smash, the villain lay splattered on the ground. You're All Might. All Might was the only hero who had managed to defeat his father, all for one. That fact alone had made Izuku very fond of All Might. He had given him hope the last few years that things might be able to change and be better. Now, when he was in front of him, he didn't know what to say. Izuku was technically his worst enemy's child. Even if he weren't aware of that fact, and Izuku would rather keep it like that. Yes, and as a hero, I better collect this villain before he escapes. Izuku helped All Might collect the villain in one of All Might's bottles. When they were finished, Izuku hesitated a little. It was a thought that had been on his mind for the last few months. He hadn't dared ask 𝐲𝐸, but maybe All Might. All Might. Yes, what is it, young boy? I was just wondering. What does it take to be a hero? All Might stopped and thought for a second before answering. A strong and richious heart. I believe those to be the most important traits. Do you want to be a hero? Izuku didn't know. When he was young, he knew he wanted to be a hero. He wanted to save people and make them feel safe. Now, he had done so much bad. Did he really deserve to say he wanted to be a hero? I don't know. I don't think I deserve to call myself a hero. And why is that? From what I just saw, you faced a villain bravely and confidently. I was quite impressed. I have done a lot of bad things before. All Might stopped to think again. Well, we have all done bad things sometimes. No one is perfect, and maybe being a hero could be your way to make up for those bad things you have done. Izuku hadn't thought about that before. Could he really be a hero? I'm sorry, young boy, but I better be off. Yes, of course. Sorry for keeping you. With that, Izuku watched as All Might jumped away and disappeared in the distance. Izuku stood there for a while thinking about the conversation. When he started running again, it was with much lighter and happier steps. For the first time in a really long time, he felt he could start chasing his long-dead dream without feeling way too guilty. He could use the powers his father had given him to do bad, to do good. The thought of making his father disappointed like that made him strangely happy. Just when Izuku was about to head back to UA, he could hear small explosions in the distance. He gets a little curious and heads closer. The closer he gets, the louder the explosions get, and he starts to get a little worried. If it were a villain, shouldn't someone already have done something by now? When he arrives, there are a lot of people on the way also interested in the disturbance. He pushed his way through the crowd to see what it is that is happening. In the middle of the alley is the same sludge from before. This time, however, he has a kid trapped in his body who is making explosions. The kid seems to be the same age as he is. What was happening? Wasn't All Might supposed to take care of the villain? Had he dropped him on his way over? Was it Izuku's fault because he had kept him with his stupid question? However, if that was the case, shouldn't he be showing up to take care of him again? In fact, no hero was doing anything. The heroes on the spot were either taking care of the fires the explosions had caused or keeping the crowd away. Izuku looked at the kid and was beginning to see real fear in his eyes. Why wasn't anyone doing anything? Izuku was getting frustrated just standing there himself. That is when he got a stupid idea. 𝐲𝐸 was definitely going to kill him if he found out. Tatsuki was beginning to freak out. He had been captured by the villain for 5 minutes now and no one was doing anything. In the beginning, he had just been mad at himself for being captured and not being able to get free himself. Then, he had been mad at the heroes for not doing anything. The extras were just standing there watching him suffer. Some heroes they were. Now though, fear had begun to take over. Ha couldn't breathe. The villain was blocking his airways, and no matter what he did, he couldn't get a proper breath of air in. He wouldn't give up though. He would fight against the villain until he understood what a poor choice he had made taking him. Thinking he would be an easy target. He was going to be the future #1 hero, and no small fry like this was going to bring him down. That is when his gaze focused on a kid with green hair, probably his own age, standing in the crowd. The kid had his right hand outstretched towards him and his green eyes were glowing. The villain was beginning to get dragged away of him. It was like it was being dragged towards the kid with green eyes. Was he using his quirk to try and save him? As the villain was being dragged off him, he could finally take a breath again. That made him able to fight harder against the villain and finally get free. He jumped away from the villain, putting some distance between them. The sludge villain seemed to be stuck in place, though not being able to move. He could see how it struggled against invisible bonds trying to get to Katsuki again. That didn't last long though, and soon the sludge freely lunged for him again. He was just about to jump away. He was not going to be captured again when All Might jumped in front of him and threw a Detroit smash. The villain was blown apart and did not get back together. Katsuki looked towards the crowd searching for the boy with green hair. He saw him slipping through the crowd, disappearing as if nothing happened. Katsuki ignored all the heroes trying to compliment him for escaping on his own. No one else seemed to have noticed the boy, and he made to follow the green curls that were slowly disappearing. He was not going to get away that easily. Izuku felt oddly satisfied. He had managed to help that boy, and no one had seen him. He had done something actually good for the first time in his life, although technically illegal, but no one had to find out. He was almost jumping in his steps when someone came up to him from behind. "Hey, you, stop." He turned around and saw the same boy from earlier. He had blonde spiky hair and red eyes. If his quirk was the explosions he had seen before, Izuku thought his appearance matched well with his quirk. It almost looked like his hair had exploded. The boy, however, didn't look happy about being saved or scared because of what he had been through. He just looked furious. Izuku had a strange feeling that anger was directed at him. "I didn't need your stupid help. I don't know what you are talking about. I haven't done anything." Had he actually seen something? Izuku thought he was being careful. And if he knew, shouldn't he be grateful? Anger was not the reaction he was expecting after saving someone. Was he missing something? "Don't play dumb with me. I saw you. Your eyes were glowing or whatever. You're just a Deku." His eyes had been glowing. His mother's eyes had never been glowing when she used her quirk. Was it his own quirk that had done it? He had been forced to use it since the sludge had been so strong. No one had ever mentioned that before, and he had never looked in the mirror while he was using it, so he guessed it was possible. What had he called him though? Deku. Yes, it means someone is useless. Like you. Izuku was beginning to get a little angry. He was mad at him for saving him. Guess his explosive attitude matched his quirk too. Really? If I'm useless, then what does that make you? With that, Izuku turned around and walked away. It seemed to take a second for the boy to come back from that before he started following him again. He could almost see him fuming with anger, although it could be his quirk too. Before he could catch up with Izuku again though, he turned into an alleyway and flew up to the roof before he could see him. When he looked down, he could see the boy confused looking around. He turned around ignoring him and made his way back to UA. "You took longer than you said." 𝐲𝐸 had been waiting for him when he got back to their house. Izuku was starting to feel really tired and was not eager for a confrontation. "I just got held up." He tried to walk past 𝐲𝐸, but he stubbornly stood in the way. "By what exactly? I'm here right now, aren't I? What does it matter?" "It matters because your situation isn't exactly normal and I'm here to make sure you are safe. For me to do that I need to know what happens when I'm not around." Yeah. Sorry for being such a burden." With that, he slid under 𝐲𝐸's arm and walked to his room. It wasn't like he locked his door or anything. He still didn't even feel comfortable closing the door yet, so 𝐲𝐸 could just walk in if he wanted. Izuku knew he wouldn't do that though. One of the best things about 𝐲𝐸 was that he knew when it was best to just leave him alone. He could hear a quiet sigh and a "you know that's not what I meant" before 𝐲𝐸 went to the kitchen. Izuku turned to his bed and jumped face first into his pillow. He really was tired. And before he knew it, he had fallen asleep. Izuku continued going out into town every day for a week. The other days were less eventful and he didn't see the spiky blonde-haired boy again. He was thankful for this. He did not seem very friendly. Perhaps his standard was a little high though because of Tagada's friendly exterior. He hadn't talked to a lot of different people when he was out. One reason was because he was mostly running around town when most people was working. The second was that he noticed that he was very socially awkward. Once he had helped an old woman carry her bags to her car. She had been very grateful and wanted him to take a bag of candy as a thank you. He had tried to say no but had only sputtered out something incomprehensible. It had ended with the lady thrusting it in his arm and leaving before he could say anything else. Izuku guessed that he'd been too used to Tagada's and Hato's constant talking, which had made him not required to say too much. He was beginning to become like 𝐴𝐻𝐸. Not that he didn't like him, but he would rather avoid being as socially awkward as him. 𝐲𝐸 had said he should try to make some new friends when he was out, or just talking to someone his own age. The only one he had met was that blonde kid though, and that didn't end very well. He turned down a street close to where the sludge villain incident had occurred. He had tried to avoid it a little. If that kid had seen him use his quirk, it was not an impossibility that someone else would recognize him, and he would rather avoid that. Now, however, he deemed enough time had passed for it to have been forgotten. He regretted that decision rather soon though. "Hey, Deku." Izuku recognized that voice, and that nickname. Sure enough, when he turned around, he met those angry red eyes again. "What is it? Fight me." "What? No." Was this boy serious? "I don't even know your name." "Katsuki Bakugo. You should remember it because I'm going to be the future #1 hero." Izuku did not know how to react to that. Should he accept? He did not know how 𝐲𝐸 would react if he found out. This Bakugo seemed to need to learn not to pick a fight with just some random kid though. However, he should say no. No, Izuku said as he turned around and tried walking away. Bakugo grabbed his arm and did not let go. "No, you will not just disappear like the last time. Why would you even want to fight me? To prove that I'm better than you. I didn't need your rescue. I'm not weak and I will prove it." Izuku looked around. He couldn't say he wasn't a little tempted. How good was another kid his age at fighting? They shouldn't do it here though, out in the open where everyone could see. All right, but not here. Izuku could see a small smile on Bakugo. He pointed down the street and started walking. "I know a place." When you said you knew a place, I did not expect a dark alleyway. "No one will come here." Izuku looked around. He did not like this. He had been specifically told to keep away from dark alleyways. However, all parents probably told that to their children. For him, if there was somewhere someone would recognize him from before, it was here. But this would probably just be a quick show of strength and then he could leave. He could be out before anyone else arrived. Bakugo put down his school bag against the wall and started cracking his knuckles. Izuku supposed he was trying to look intimidating, but Izuku had fought against full-grown men before. A kid in a school uniform would never be intimidating. You are allowed to use your quirk however much you want. As Bakugo said this, there started to come small explosions from his hands. Bakugo lunged forward and threw a strong right hook. Izuku easily sidestepped, grabbed his arm, and threw him to his back. Bakugo looked surprised for a second before he quickly got back up again. Now he was beginning to use bigger and bigger explosions, lunging at Izuku tenaciously. It was clear that he hadn't had proper training, even if he wasn't necessarily bad. But when meeting someone with experience, he stood no chance. When he understood that nothing was working, he began to attack more blindly and use more dirty tricks. He also started screaming for him to die, which was a little unexpected from someone who said he wanted to be a hero. But who was Izuku to judge? Izuku was beginning to become worried about all the sound he was making though. It would be best to end this quickly. As Bakugo threw another punch, Izuku grabbed it again. This time he didn't throw him to his back though. He kept his hold and brought it behind 𝗵𝘃𝐬's back in an uncomfortable position. Satisfied yet? Never. Die. 𝗵𝘃𝐬 tried to get loose, but 𝐬𝐡𝐤 just tightened his hold. There was a small grunt from 𝗵𝘃𝐬, but he still didn't want to give up. What would it take for him to realize it was over? In a real fight, 𝗬𝐡𝐤 could just have broken his arm by now. You haven't even used your quirk yet. Why would I if I don't need to? That seemed to be the wrong response as 𝗵𝘃𝐬 tried even harder to break free. 𝗬𝐡𝐤 was pretty sure he could feel something plop in 𝗵𝘃𝐬's arm as he struggled and immediately released his grip. When he did, 𝗵𝘃𝐬 held his arm loosely at his side. 𝗬𝐡𝐤 was pretty sure he had just dislocated his shoulder. 𝗵𝘃𝐬 didn't seem to care though, as he was just about to lunge at him again when two others stepped into the alleyway. They both stopped and looked over at the two new arrivals. The two men were both tall, a bit over 190 centimeters. Neither of them looked like they had a mutant type of quirk. One had short blonde hair while the other had a little longer black hair down to his shoulders with a big scar across one eye. Both of them looked like a typical street villain with dark, baggy and worn clothes. One of them looked down at his phone before he looked up again, a wide grin on his face. Well, it seems to be our lucky day. He showed his phone to the other and he too started to smile. 𝐬𝐡𝐤 Midoriya, with a bounty of 10 million yen and just a kid. This will be an easy payday. 𝐬𝐡𝐤 could see 𝗵𝘃𝐬 flash him a surprised face before turning back to the two men. They were all preparing for a fight. 𝐬𝐡𝐤 wasn't afraid. They didn't look that tough, and the first thing they had done was underestimate him. He didn't really know what to do though. Should he press the button on his clock and signal 𝗧𝗪? If he would have been alone, he wouldn't. He knew he could take care of it himself, and 𝗧𝗪 would only overreact. He could just fly away and pretend it didn't happen. Now, he had 𝗵𝘃𝐬 to think about too. He would have to report this to the police, and then 𝗧𝗪 would find out anyway. He would be furious if he learned that he didn't call him right away. He might not be able to protect 𝗵𝘃𝐬 on his own either. 𝐬𝐡𝐤 decided to press the button and call for 𝗧𝗪. He would have to take care of the consequences later. I don't know what you extras are talking about, but if you want to fight, you're on. That did not seem like the right thing to say, and just as 𝗵𝘃𝐬 finished that sentence, they both rushed towards him. 𝗵𝘃𝐬 didn't seem to mind though. He was preparing to fight, but just before they could clash, 𝗬𝐡𝐤 created a barrier around 𝗵𝘃𝐬. How was he even thinking of fighting with a dislocated shoulder? 𝗵𝘃𝐬 only stopped for a second before starting to hit the barrier and scream. What is this? Too scared to fight me? The two men looked just as confused though. This isn't us, one of them said before turning their attention towards 𝗬𝐡𝐤 again. Trying to protect your friend. Well, all the easier for us. They darted towards 𝗬𝐡𝐤 instead, leaving 𝗵𝘃𝐬 screaming in his bubble. As they started fighting, 𝗬𝐡𝐤 quickly figured out what their quirks was. One could make their nails into long claws instead, and the other could make sharp spikes come out of his hands that he could then use to attack. 𝗬𝐡𝐤 could understand how they had found each other. It really wouldn't have been a problem if it wouldn't have been for 𝗵𝘃𝐬. He had to practically fight quirkless while keeping the barrier around 𝗵𝘃𝐬 up. 𝗵𝘃𝐬 wasn't exactly sitting nice and still. He was now using small explosions to try and break the barrier. 𝗬𝐡𝐤 didn't doubt 𝗵𝘃𝐬's fighting spirit, but he would have enough problems without him getting hurt too. 𝗬𝐡𝐤 had underestimated 𝗵𝘃𝐬's firepower and tenacity though, and as he made an explosion much bigger than the others, 𝗬𝐡𝐤's focus slipped for a moment. This made the man with the claws able to make 5 deep cuts on 𝗬𝐡𝐤's arm. The pain made him drop the barrier around 𝗵𝘃𝐬, who immediately joined the fight. While both of them got distracted by 𝗵𝘃𝐬 blasting explosions left and right, 𝗬𝐡𝐤 managed to kick one of them in the head, instantly knocking him out. The other, however, was just about to stab 𝗵𝘃𝐬 with a spike when a white scarf wrapped around him. 𝗬𝐡𝐤 heaved a sigh of relief as 𝗧𝗪 secured both of the men with rope. The relief was short-lived though, as 𝗧𝗪 turned his attention towards 𝗬𝐡𝐤 again. Are you all right, 𝗬𝐡𝐤? Yes, I'm fine, 𝗬𝐡𝐤 said as he tried hiding his arm behind his back. No need for unnecessary worry. It wasn't easy though, with a steady stream of blood dropping down on the pavement. 𝗧𝗪 didn't fall for 𝗬𝐡𝐤's feeble attempt. He walked forward with determined steps and pulled out 𝗬𝐡𝐤's arm. 𝗬𝐡𝐤 could hear a deep sigh and something that sounded as problem child as he wrapped 𝗬𝐡𝐤's arm as good as he could. You are going directly to recovery, girl, when we get back. What do you think you are doing, stupid Deku? Accompanied with angry loud steps came 𝗵𝘃𝐬. He looked absolutely furious and maybe a little bit impressed. I don't know what you are talking about. Stop playing stupid all the time. You put me out of the fight in the beginning with that strange wall or whatever. What was that anyway? I thought your quirk was. A little panic took over 𝗬𝐡𝐤. His mother's quirk was not one that 𝗧𝗪 knew about. And 𝗬𝐡𝐤 did not need 𝗧𝗪 to find out about 3 quirks. That would draw up far too many questions. 𝗵𝘃𝐬, how's your arm? That caused 𝗧𝗪 to turn his attention to 𝗵𝘃𝐬's arm, which was still hanging loosely at his side. He walked forward to examine it. You're hurt too. How did it happen? Maybe that wasn't the best thing to have drawn his attention to after all, and 𝗬𝐡𝐤 could feel his face grow hot. Actually, that was me. That earned him a glaring gaze from 𝗧𝗪. Would you care to elaborate on that, 𝗬𝐡𝐤? No, rather not. Before 𝐲𝐸 could push him for answers though, to Izuku's surprise, 𝗵𝘃𝐻 spoke up. I'm fine. It was my own fault anyway. 𝐲𝐸 inspected 𝗵𝘃𝐻's face for a few seconds before looking satisfied. If you say so, I will have to take these two to the police station. Do you want to accompany me there or go directly to Recovery Girl? Izuku didn't even have to think about it before he answered. We will go directly to Recovery Girl. He did not want to put a foot in a police station. Before 𝐲𝐸 could say anything else, Izuku started to walk away. 𝗵𝘃𝐻 followed soon after. It surprised Izuku that 𝗵𝘃𝐻 actually did come. He had half expected him to go his own way, ignoring 𝐲𝐸. He had a creeping suspicion why though. Now start talking. What is your quirk? And there it started. The endless questions. Why do you even care? Izuku asked with a sigh. Because I have now seen you use two different quirks. First, that pull quirk or whatever against the sludge. And then that barrier today. You also disappeared without a trace that day. I already told you. It wasn't me that day. You probably just imagined because you were under great distress, and it's not my fault that you are bad at searching. Without missing a step, he ducked under a fist intended for his face. And that too. How did you even dodge that without even looking? Have you had some kind of training? Yes, I suppose you could say that. They arrived at the UA gate. Izuku looked towards a camera and gestured towards 𝗵𝘃𝐻. He's with me, he said before walking through. You live at UA. Izuku just gave a short yes before leading him toward Recovery Girl's office. How old are you anyway? Do you attend UA? I'm only 14, so no, I don't attend UA. Then are you going to? You are awfully talkative. 𝗵𝘃𝐻 clicked his tongue and said whatever before going silent. Izuku did feel a little bad, but he was tired of all the questions. He was a little interested though. And how old are you? Same as you. He grumbled before growing silent again. Izuku didn't even have to ask if he wanted to go to UA. He had said he wanted to become the #1 hero one day, and UA had the best hero course there was. Interesting. So, if Izuku decided to start UA, they would maybe be classmates. However, he would have to dare to ask Nezu or 𝐲𝐸 first. When Izuku opened the door to Recovery Girl's office, he almost closed it again from the look he got from her. It wasn't that long ago that he had visited her office last. His lessons with Nezu sometimes became kind of intense. Recovery Girl was not happy about that. Here again so soon, Midoriya. What has Nezu come up with this time? It wasn't his fault this time. I got attacked on the street. She didn't look much happier with that explanation and turned her gaze to 𝗵𝘃𝐻. And what about this young boy? The same, I presume. No. That was me, Izuku confessed awkwardly. Reckless kids these days. Dislocated, I see. We will have to pull it back first. She gestured both of them towards a bed where 𝗵𝘃𝐻 sat down. Midoriya, you can help me. Hold his arm like this and then. Before she could say any more, he had already pulled 𝗵𝘃𝐻's arm back into position. It earned a few bad words from 𝗵𝘃𝐻. I have already had some experience with dislocated shoulders, Izuku said sheepishly. That earned a small sigh from Recovery Girl. Let me see that arm of yours now, Midoriya. After she had inspected both of them and, to 𝗵𝘃𝐻's horror, given them a kiss on the cheek, they were both free to go. Izuku led 𝗵𝘃𝐻 back to the UA gate where 𝗵𝘃𝐻 stopped. He took out a small piece of paper, wrote something on it, and then handed it to Izuku. When Izuku looked at the paper, a number was written there. Next time you go out for a run or whatever, text me. Izuku just looked at him in surprise as he started to walk away. See you next time, Deku. And with that, he was gone. Izuku looked at the paper again. Why had he given him his number? Had Izuku actually made a new friend? Izuku hadn't thought 𝗵𝘃𝐻 had especially liked him. Izuku hadn't exactly been the nicest to him either. But what did he know? He suspected he would have to get used to the name Deku in that case. He would just have to wait and see what the future held, he thought as he started walking back to the house. When Izuku got back to the house, 𝐲𝐸 wasn't there yet. He started making dinner while he waited. He did not look forward to the inevitable conversation they would have when he got home. 20 minutes later, and with the food ready on the table, 𝐲𝐸 opened the door. His expression was unreadable. If anything, he looked more exhausted than normal, which was saying something. 𝐲𝐸 sat down at the table not saying a word. Izuku sat at the opposite side feeling a little awkward. I was present at the interrogation. Did you know about the bounty? No, not until today, Izuku said truthfully. He hadn't really been surprised, and if he had looked, he could probably have found it. It really didn't matter to him though, and he wouldn't have told 𝐲𝐸 even if he had known. They didn't seem to know anything else about you, which is good. Still, is there anything I should know? Izuku hung his head. There was. 𝐲𝐸 should know about where he was from, what kind of people they were, what was probably coming, the nomis, Shigaraki, all for one, and who Izuku was, what he had done. He remained silent. He couldn't talk. He was scared. It had been so good this past, what was it, months? Had it really been that long? He didn't want to lose it. 𝐲𝐸 sighed in defeat. I understand that you may not be able to talk about it yet. Just know that when you are, I will be right here. Izuku still didn't say anything. And then on to the next problem. I think it will be better if you stay on UA grounds for a while. Before you interrupt, This is not negotiable. You have a bounty on your head. You can't honestly think I would let you go out with that. Well, no, Izuku didn't. But hearing it out loud, would he be stuck here again? Izuku didn't know if he could take that. 𝐲𝐸 seemed to pick up on Izuku's worry. Before you start to panic, this will not be permanent, I promise. I am getting help from a detective and he will try and find the source and remove the bounty. When he has done that, then you're free to go out. That did calm Izuku down a little. How long would it take though? Days, weeks, or even months? Izuku didn't want to think about it. And when you do go out again, try not to dislocate any more shoulders. Yes, sir, Izuku said with a small smile. He could tell 𝐲𝐸 wasn't angry about it. And when Izuku thought back on it, it was kind of funny. They ate the rest of dinner in silence, and after Izuku returned to his room, Izuku took out the small piece of paper with 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝑔𝐿's number on it and put it on his desk. Guess it will be a while before I will get the chance to use it, he thought. The next day Izuku was walking towards Nenzu's office. He was supposed to have a lesson today. He was also planning on finally asking about maybe attending UA. He was a little worried since he technically didn't have any grades or past achievements. He knocked on the door and entered. Hello, Nenzu. Hello, Midoriya. It seems you have a question for me. Izuku didn't know if he wanted to know how Nenzu could always tell those kinds of things. He instead just nodded and sat down opposite Nenzu. I was wondering, is there any chance for me to attend UA next year? Well, of course, there is. Nenzu seemed absolutely delighted by Izuku's question. I have been waiting for you to ask. Now tell me, do you want to take the normal exam, or do you want to take the exam for recommended students? I can choose. Well, yes, of course. What's the difference? Normally students who enter through recommendation have a better chance at shoving off their abilities if they have been scouted beforehand. Since I already know you, I know you are good enough to enter even without an exam, but it's tradition for all students to take an entrance exam. I think I want to take the normal entrance exam. Then I will get all the paper ready. I know you will have no problem getting in. Thank you, Nenzu. Now to the lesson. The days passed, and a week, another week, a month, and still no word from the detective. Izuku was starting to get bored out of his mind. 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝑔𝐿 must think he straight out ignored him. He had considered sending a text saying it was probably going to take a while but chickened out. He didn't even know what he was after. Then one breakfast 𝐲𝐸 finally came with the good news. I got word from the detective yesterday. Izuku immediately rose from his chair. I can go out again. A sigh. Yes, I suppose there is no reason not to. But if you feel anything is off, like someone is watching you, don't hesitate to contact me. All right. Izuku was already running towards his room, sandwich stuffed into his mouth, and only got out a muffled hm. It seemed to be enough for 𝐲𝐸 because he didn't stop him when he was running out the door a minute later. He managed to get out his phone and send a short message to 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝑔𝐿 with the route he was planning to take. It was a Sunday, and 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝑔𝐿 should be free from school at least. Sure enough, not a minute later he got a thumbs up. Izuku didn't know how to interpret it. Was he planning on meeting up with him, or was it just a thumbs up that he had seen the message? Izuku didn't much care. He was just so happy to be out again. He had been running for 15 minutes when he saw the familiar spiky blonde hair up ahead. Izuku kept running, and when he got close, 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝑔𝐿 started running beside him. What took you so long, Deku? It's been over a month. Well, I don't know if you noticed, but I had a bounty on my head. Yeah, what was all that about? Izuku didn't say anything for a while. He didn't know how much he wanted to say. Scaring 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝑔𝐿 was the last thing he wanted to do. Although, considering his fight was probably what had led 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝑔𝐿 to become interested in meeting up with him again, there probably was a small risk of that. Some past trouble I got myself into, or got dragged in, more accurately, Izuku thought. Had to have been some trouble. 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝑔𝐿 answered with a snort. Yes, you could say that. You never gave me an answer last time. Do you want to attend UA? Yes. All right, then follow me. 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝑔𝐿 started running down a side street instead, and Izuku didn't know what to think. He started running after 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝑔𝐿, and they didn't say anything for the next 5 minutes while they were running. When 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝑔𝐿 started slowing down, they had arrived at a beach, or a would-be beach if it weren't for all the junk lying everywhere. What is this place? Izuku asked with a skeptical look. Dagaba Beach, where does all the scrap come from? I read that it started washing up from the ocean, and then others started throwing away their own garbage here. Izuku was just getting more and more confused. And what are we doing here? To train. No one will come around here, and there is no worry about destroying anything valuable. You seemed to be worried about that last time. Dark alleyways didn't seem to go so well. You want me to train you? Izuku asked with a surprised look. What? No, don't think you are better than me, Deku, just because you happened to win last time. We will train together. Everybody else is just weaklings. Izuku thought that was a very mild way of putting it, since the last time had ended with his dislocated shoulder. He didn't say anything, however. Izuku suspected 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝑔𝐿 already knew this. It could be fun anyway. 𝐲𝐸 hadn't let him spar with Tagata, Hado, or Amajiki. All right, fine. They both made their way through all the trash, trying to find an open spot to move around. After walking around for a bit, They understood that that wouldn't happen, and they decided to clear away some of the trash in the middle instead. And, how do you want to do this? Like last time, we will attack each other until someone wins. If we have any pointers for the other, we say so. Very straightforward and a little childish, 𝐬𝐸 thought. 𝐬𝐸 really felt that 𝐵𝑒𝑘𝐻𝑢go just wanted to take advantage of someone who had had real training. However, he had already said he would do it, and if he would do it properly. And use your quirk this time. I will use it when I need to, 𝐬𝐸 said as a challenge. He would make sure that by the time of the entrance exam, 𝐵𝑒𝑘𝐻𝑢go would be a fight to be reckoned with. 𝐵𝑒𝑘𝐻𝑢go charged and they sparred for the next 2 hours. 𝐬𝐸 won every match and didn't need to use his quirk a single time. By the end of it, they were both sweaty and had sand everywhere. When they sat down on the sand and looked around, they saw that a lot of the trash had been burned by 𝐵𝑒𝑘𝐻𝑢go's explosion. People might start to wonder about that if we plan to continue staying here. 𝐬𝐸 thought out loud. Then what do you suggest we do? Why not do the community a service and clean it away? 𝐵𝑒𝑘𝐻𝑢go started laughing. When he realized 𝐬𝐸 wasn't laughing with him, he looked at him. A groan slipped out. You are actually serious, aren't you? 𝐬𝐸 shrugged. What we are doing is technically illegal with you using your quirk. We can at least do something in return. I guess. It will be good training, 𝐵𝑒𝑘𝐻𝑢go said as he stood up and tried to wipe away most of the sand. 𝐬𝐸 didn't feel good about breaking the law, even if he technically wasn't the one doing it. He wanted to make up for all the bad things he had done, and he did not want to add to that list. So, clearing away some junk was his way of trying to redeem himself for crossing the line. As 𝐵𝑒𝑘𝐻𝑢go had said, clearing away all the things that had been burned was a great effort. 40 minutes later, by the end of it, they were both drenched in sweat. They also had the sand from before and big splotches of grime. Neither of them dared guess what it was. I will see you in the water, 𝐵𝑒𝑘𝐻𝑢go said as he sprinted to the water fully dressed and submerged himself in it. 𝐬𝐸 was left standing a safe distance away on the shore. He still had his nightmares about drowning in water and could never bring himself to bathe. Only the thought of putting his head under the water made him breathe a little faster. He would just have to wait to take a shower at home. What are you waiting for, Deku? 𝐵𝑒𝑘𝐻𝑢go was making his way back towards him, dropping water. I'm not particularly fond of water. 𝐵𝑒𝑘𝐻𝑢go gave a loud snort. You are afraid of some water. Don't you even know how to swim then? 𝐬𝐸 just remained quiet. No, he did not know how to swim. And he was not planning on learning anytime soon. Haha, guess you really live up to the name, Deku. Whatever, 𝐬𝐸 said and started walking home. 𝐵𝑒𝑘𝐻𝑢go joined soon after, still dripping wet. On their way back, 𝐬𝐸 was thinking hard. 𝐬𝐸 had never felt comfortable calling others by their first name. He wasn't even allowed to before. Katsuki 𝐵𝑒𝑘𝐻𝑢go, however, if he was going to keep calling him Deku, then they got to an intersection where they had to separate ways. See you next time, Deku. See you, 𝐻𝐸𝐽. 𝐬𝐸 managed to get a glimpse of 𝐻𝐸𝐽's surprised look before he turned away and headed home. You better get used to it, 𝐻𝐸𝐽, 𝐬𝐸 thought with a slight grin on his face. As the weeks and eventually months went by, 𝐬𝐸 kept training with 𝐻𝐸𝐽. The beach was getting cleaner and cleaner. They started seeing the beach as their goal to have completely restored by the time of the entrance exam. 𝐻𝐸𝐽 was getting better and better at hand-to-hand combat, and didn't rely as much on his explosions. 𝐬𝐸 saw this as a personal success, even if 𝐻𝐸𝐽 would never agree that it was thanks to 𝐬𝐸. It was also to 𝐬𝐸's surprise that he felt that he had grown a lot too. Mostly that he had gotten more confident. He had only had to use his force field quirk a few times, mostly to try and avoid 𝐻𝐸𝐽's wrath. On 𝐬𝐸's request, both 𝐬𝐸 and 𝐻𝐸𝐽 had gotten permission from Nezu to use the school's training grounds too sometimes. 𝐬𝐸 was suspecting that Nezu sometimes had fun pranking them too, because sometimes robots would start to malfunction and start attacking them. He could only imagine Nezu sitting and laughing at them from behind a screen when 𝐻𝐸𝐽 had quite literally fallen through the floor when a trapdoor had opened beneath him. 𝐬𝐸 had a hard time deciding how he would do on the entrance exam with his quirks. He had managed to convince 𝐻𝐸𝐽 that his force field quirk and flying quirk were the same, even if he had a little problem explaining the science behind it. He did not, however, dare to use any of his other quirks. 𝐻𝐸𝐽 had seen him use his mother's telekinesis quirk, but after endless squabbles, 𝐻𝐸𝐽 had finally stopped asking about it. Hopefully, he was starting to believe he had actually seen wrong. Flying and making shields were more defensive quirks though, and he had to find a way to use them more offensively. In the afternoon, the day before the entrance exam, 𝐬𝐸 was meeting up with 𝐻𝐸𝐽 at the usual intersection. What took you so long, Deku? It was your idea to finish cleaning the beach today. Yeah, I got held up by 𝐡𝗏𝗏. They ran together the last way to the beach. There were only a few pieces of small garbage left and the beach was starting to look really beautiful. 𝐬𝐸 couldn't help but feel proud of what they had managed to accomplish in the past few months. Even if 𝐻𝐸𝐽 would rather die than admit it, 𝐬𝐸 could tell he was too. Let's make it a contest. The one who collects the most wins. 𝐻𝐸𝐽 said it with the same fire that every mention of a competition brought. Why does everything have to be a competition with you? 𝐬𝐸 said it as a complaint but couldn't help a small grin. Just don't cry when you lose. As if Deku, Both of them took starting position. 3, 2, 1, go. They started piling it up in 2 separate piles. 𝐬𝐸 would not have believed it could have been this fun collecting trash. After a while, it started to get a little overboard when they both started to try stealing from the other one's pile. Then it became a challenge to both protect their pile own and collect more. It didn't take long before both were using their quirks. When they had been going on for 2 hours, they both had 2 neatly piled heaps of trash. The next problem, deciding the victor. I definitely have more than you. Well, you only collected the small pieces. Mine would definitely weigh more. It's called tactic. You said it would be the one who collected the most, not the heaviest. But mine is more in mass. Now you are just changing the rules to win. We never had any rules to begin with. No, the only thing you said was the one who collects the most wins, and I did. You are only bending my words to your advantage. Well, it's true. After 10 more minutes of back and forth, they decided to make it a tie. Even though both of them saw themselves as the victor, they decided to leave it there for the day. They didn't want to be sore for the entrance exam tomorrow and started walking home. Still, I'm not satisfied with leaving it as a tie. Of course, you aren't, 𝐬𝐸 grumbled. The victor will be the one with the highest score on the practical exam tomorrow. I knew you would make that to a competition too. Why not the written exam too? 𝐬𝐸 said teasingly. Tusk, I don't start competitions I know I won't win. You have the principal 𝐁𝐦 as your personal teacher. Well, it's cute you think you can win in the practical at least. After that comment, 𝐬𝐸 had to first duck under a right hook and then jump over 𝐀𝐦's outreached foot. 𝐀𝐦 had made it a personal mission to try and manage to trip 𝐬𝐸 when he least expected it. The most he had succeeded with so far was a small stumble. Tusk, still no luck, he muttered under his breath. Just wait, and I will show you real power. Can't wait, 𝐬𝐸 said sarcastically. You still don't know what we will do on the exam, right? No, I don't. If you do, that will count as cheating. I already told you, I don't. Fine, they parted ways and 𝐬𝐸 ran the last way home. When he got back home and through the door, he found 𝐲𝗏 waiting with dinner on the table. He sat down still in his training clothes. Looking forward to tomorrow, 𝐲𝗏 asked. I mean it's an exam. I don't really know if you are supposed to feel excited about that. Guess that is true, 𝐲𝗏 said with a small chuckle. I'm sure you will do great regardless. I have looked in on you and 𝐵𝑒𝑘𝐸 when you have been reigning on UA grounds, and from what I have managed to see, you have nothing to be worried about. 𝐵𝑒𝑘𝐸 neither for that matter. I'm not really worried. A little exam is not the worst I have experienced, 𝐬𝐸 said somberly. 𝐲𝗏 looked at him almost a little expectantly, like he thought he might continue. 𝐬𝐸 on the other hand had no plans on telling anything more. You still don't know what the exam will be, right? No, I asked 𝐬𝐸 once, but he wouldn't say anything. He said it might not be the same anyways. I think he only enjoys teasing me about it. Well, I'm not going to tell you either. You should get ready for bed. Make sure you are well rested for tomorrow. Sure. 𝐬𝐸 took his plate and placed it on the sink. He wasn't really tired yet, but he thought he might as well go to bed anyways. He was probably going to wake up at least once from his nightmares anyway. He changed into his night clothes, and he couldn't help it. Even if it was an exam, he was looking forwards to it. He couldn't wait for the next day to arrive. To 𝐬𝐸's surprise, he slept through the whole night and woke up to his alarm. 𝐲𝗏 had already left when he got to the kitchen. He had a lot to prepare for the exam with all the security. 𝐬𝐸 was not envious of him. He just prepared some sandwiches for breakfast before he headed towards the door. When he looked at the time, he saw it was 10 minutes before he was supposed to meet up with 𝐀𝐦 at the UA gate. He took his shoes on and headed there. When he arrived, 𝐀𝐦 was already there waiting for him. They were a little early but made their way towards the building anyway. Are you ready to get your ass kicked? Huh, you wish. 𝐀𝐦 put his hand in his pocket and pulled out a small object. Before 𝐬𝐸 could see what it was, he had thrown it up in the air and said catch. When 𝐬𝐸 shifted his focus to the small object, 𝐀𝐦 put his foot out. 𝐬𝐸 managed to catch the object but stumbled over 𝐀𝐦's foot. In his attempt to regain his footing, he bumped into a girl with short brown hair. 𝐬𝐸 immediately straightened and then bowed his head. Sorry about that. The brown-haired girl only giggled. I'm fine. How about you? You are the one who took a stumble. Oh, I'm fine. I'm used to 𝐀𝐦's shenanigans. 𝐬𝐸 shot 𝐀𝐦 a glaring look, silently demanding him to apologize too. 𝐀𝐦 on the other hand only looked slightly crestfallen that it didn't work. Now that 𝐬𝐸 had managed the situation, he looked at the object in his hand that 𝐀𝐦 had thrown. It was just a stupid rock. 𝐬𝐸 threw it away in the grass. What was that? The girl asked. It was nothing, just a stupid stone. 𝐬𝐸 threw another accusing look at 𝐀𝐦, who only looked like he was about to burst into laughter. Should we head inside? Right, yes. They headed inside together but split up when they found their seats. After a while of waiting, President Mike entered and started explaining the practical exam. They were also given their exam tickets with their allotted locations. Looks like we are in different locations. Tusk, I was hoping to fight you directly. You wouldn't stand a chance. President Mike was beginning to explain the rules with the objective of destroying robots. Izuku didn't think that sounded too hard, even if neither flying nor force field packed any remarkable firepower. But Izuku had an idea grow in his mind. This is going to be easy. My quirk is practically made for this, 𝐀𝐦 said with a wide grin. Not as confident anymore, are you? Excuse me. A tall boy who had just been asking some questions turned his attention toward Izuku and 𝐀𝐦. You have been talking and disturbing all the rest. If you are not going to take this seriously, then leave. Stupid 4 eyes, 𝐀𝐦 mumbled angrily but remained otherwise silent. President Mike finished talking and Izuku and 𝐀𝐦 split up for their respective arenas. Outside the gate of the arena, Izuku could see both the tall boy and the girl with brown hair. She looked a little nervous, but Izuku didn't know what he would say to her if he walked up to her, so he remained where he stood. The gate to the arena opened and Izuku took off with a sprint through them. He hesitated a little and thought maybe he should have waited for a start signal, but nobody came to stop him, so he continued. Izuku activated the flying quirk and lifted off the ground. He could see a one-pointer further ahead and flew straight toward it. When he was only a meter from flying into it, he also activated his force field in front of him. He shaped the force field with a sharp peak and flew straight through the robot. It left a big hole in the robot's chest, and it immediately fell to the ground. 1 point, he thought as he flew towards the next robot. He continued doing it like that on all the other robots he saw, flying straight towards them and then activating his force field on the last second. It was exhausting and hard using 2 quirks at the same time, so he tried to use his force field as little as possible. He also tried helping others who seemed to be in trouble. He was a little worried it was going to take away his time to destroy more robots. Izuku was not going to lose against 𝐀𝐦, but he could not with a good conscience leave others who seemed to struggle. He wanted to be a hero after all. 𝐀𝐦 was right though. His quirk was made for this. Against a person he would have to hold back, but against robots he could go all out. And he could also technically fly. Izuku tried to fly faster, destroying robots at a faster pace. When Izuku had reached 83 points, he could hear a large crash. He could also see a lot of the participants heading away from the crash. As he looked towards where the crash was, he could see a gigantic robot appearing. The 0-pointer. This was definitely Nedzu's idea of fun, he thought. He was just about to head the other way when he could hear a cry of pain. When he looked back, he could see the girl with brown hair stuck under some of the rubble. He didn't hesitate for a second as he turned around and flew straight towards the massive robot heading straight towards her. Izuku felt kinda stupid. He knew Nedzu was probably the one controlling it and he would never hurt a student. Well, intentionally at least. Nedzu could sometimes go a little overboard and expect a little too much. He didn't always know where the human limit was. Izuku also knew that if he wanted to become a hero, he couldn't rely on others to save people. He had to do it himself. It was a common problem with humans to think that someone else would do it, leading to the result that nobody does it in the end because everybody thinks the same. It was probably what all the others running away were thinking. With all that in mind, Izuku sped up toward the girl and the robot. He wondered if the same trick he used on the smaller robots would work here too. It was probably a hopeful, unrealistic thought. A small hole like before wouldn't stop a big robot like this. The thought of using his control over force fields as a weapon had never really occurred to Izuku before this. He liked the power because it was able to protect others and had focused a lot on his control of it. He had never wanted to use it as a weapon and therefore never experimented with it. A crazy idea occurred to Izuku that Nedzu was most likely going to be proud of. He focused the force field into a thin line in front of him with a sharp edge. He then pushed it forward with all his might toward the robot. The makeshift sword cut right through the robot's middle and it immediately stopped working. What Izuku hadn't calculated for, however, was that the top of the robot was starting to fall forward. The girl was right at the crash site. Izuku flew towards her, landing beside her and putting a force field above both of them. The robot hit a second later. It was so heavy that Izuku had to his own quirk to enhance the force field to make it whole. When it had fallen, the force from it hitting Izuku's force field had made a dent in the metal, making a little space where he and the girl could sit without Izuku keeping the shield up. Izuku sat down with a thud when the adrenaline wore off. He felt exhausted and stupid. He almost put her in more danger than she was already in. He wasn't used to saving people, and this made that painfully clear. "Are you all right?" The girl crawled up to him in their limited space. That made him feel even worse. He was the one who tried to save her and she was asking him if he was all right. "Yeah, I'm fine, just tired. What about you?" "Yes, I'm fine thanks to you." "Thank you." She was only making him feel worse. She shouldn't be thanking him. He put her in danger. Izuku wanted desperately to get out of there. That is when it hit him. He was stuck in a small space with no door or escape. Izuku started to breathe faster and finally hyperventilate. He needed to get out. "Are you sure you are all right?" The girl looked at him worriedly. Izuku couldn't answer. No one was going to trap him ever again. As the panic took over, the girl didn't have time to say anything else before he blasted his way through the enclosed space and the robot out into the open air. He was still hyperventilating as he got out. There were a lot of heroes around the destroyed robot. Did they think he was trying to attack the girl? That he had dropped the robot on purpose on her? Was that why they were all there? To arrest him, lock him up in a cell, and leave him there with no way out? Izuku wasn't thinking straight. He knew that. He had to calm down, but he couldn't. Before any of the heroes could catch up to him, Izuku was flying full speed away from them and away from Yue. Aizawa was looking at the practical exam from multiple screens together with the other teachers. He was impressed with both Bakugo's and Izuku's use of their quirks. They were quickly racking up points faster than the others. They really are impressive, 𝐲𝐸 could hear Nezu say to himself. Some of the other teachers were nodding in agreement, but most were fully paying attention to the screens. This was, after all, a great moment to see what they would need to focus on with the new students that would be accepted. That Bakugo kid has no rescue points whatsoever. However, Power Loader answered to Nezu's muttering. That was true. Bakugo was now up in 75 points, but not a single rescue point. It didn't really surprise 𝐲𝐸 from what little he had seen and heard from Izuku. That was something he would have to work on if he wanted to be a hero. Izuku, on the other hand, wasn't hesitating to help others who seemed to be in trouble. On the other hand, he was pretty sloppy doing it. It was painfully obvious that he wasn't used to working together with others. That was something he would have to work on. What do you say we make this a little more interesting? Nezu said with a wide grin on his face. Power Loader, is it ready? Yes, of course, let's give these kids a bigger challenge. As he said this, he pressed a button, and they could hear the big robots make their entrance to the different locations. They could see kids starting to run away as fast as they saw the big robot approaching. 𝐲𝐸 had always been a little skeptical about this part of the exam. He was all for showing kids the hard challenge of being heroes and the dangers it entailed. He would, however, like it to be under more controlled circumstances the first time. A big robot wreaking its way through the training city, raining down debris everywhere, could not be called controlled. He was always surprised none of the kids were hurt more seriously. Nothing recovery girls couldn't handle, at least. 𝐲𝐸 caught himself holding his breath. However, when a girl got stuck under some of the falling debris, all the others were running away, leaving her there. She didn't seem to be able to get away on her own. Shouldn't you stop that robot? 𝐲𝐸 said, pointing to the screen with the girl. Oh no, it's just about to get interesting, was Nezu's answer. Look, our young Izuku is already on his way. When 𝐲𝐸 looked back at the screen, he could see it was true. Izuku was flying full speed towards the big robot to try and save the girl. He only managed to wonder how he would deal with such a big robot when a big glowing like sword shot out from Izuku and cut the robot in two. Before he could sigh in relief, however, he saw how the upper part of the robot began falling forward towards the girl. The last thing he saw before he was out the door running towards it was Izuku and the girl getting crushed by the robot. He could hear running footsteps behind him from the other heroes who also saw what happened. They arrived in only a few seconds. They had only started to discuss how they would lift the robot without injuring the two kids further when they heard a loud crash from it. 𝐲𝐸 could see a blur of Izuku flying up in the air. 𝐲𝐸 heaved a sigh of relief when he saw him, but that was before he saw the panicked look on Izuku's face. 𝐲𝐸 knew that meant he was about to have a panic attack. Before he could call out to him, however, he was already flying away. You take care of the girl, I will find Izuku. He managed to get out before he was running again. Everything was happening too fast. The last minute had been a roller coaster of panic and relief. He had no idea where Izuku would even go. He hadn't flown in the direction of the house, but instead away from Yue. He couldn't just run around blindly looking for him in the city. Why had he even flown away? Had he not managed to save the girl when the robot fell and didn't know what to do? 𝐲𝐸 was sure he had seen him reach her before the robot fell. Though, and if Izuku was fine, the girl should be too. Then was it something else? 𝐲𝐸 had stopped running and instead slowed down to a fast walk. He needed time to think before he did anything else. What had made Izuku freak out like that? What had triggered the panic? There was no water nearby, so it couldn't be that. 𝐲𝐸 knew there were more things Izuku was afraid of, but he had never gotten him to open up about them. When he woke from a nightmare, he allowed 𝐲𝐸 to be there and help him calm down. But he never opened up about what they were about. He was also afraid of closed rooms. Could it have been that he felt trapped under the robot? That could explain why he had blown his way out of it. But he shouldn't have left afterwards when he was out, if that was all. Hey, Aizawa, where's Deku? 𝐲𝐸 was still deep in thought when he heard Bakugo and was almost about to ignore him when it hit him. Bakugo, where do you and Izuku go when you hang out? 𝐲𝐸 said in a rush, and he could see Bakugo take a step back. What? 𝐲𝐸 took a deep breath and gave a very simplified explanation of what happened. He could see that the fact that 𝐲𝐸 thought Izuku might be having a panic attack seemed to be a new thing Bakugo heard about Izuku. It worried 𝐲𝐸 that Izuku hadn't even mentioned it to a friend he had had for nearly a year. But that was a problem for later. We train on a beach, 𝗳𝗏𝗄 beach. That name didn't ring any bell for 𝐲𝐸. Could you show the way? 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐬 only nodded and they headed together to 𝐲𝐸𝐬's car. On the way he got a text from 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐬 saying that the girl was alright. That was a relief and one less thing to worry about. Does he get panic attacks often? 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐬 asked quietly when they were driving to the beach. It surprised 𝐲𝐸𝐬 with how worried 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐬 sounded. He wakes up from nightmares leading to panic attacks more frequently than I would like to admit. But I think that if you really want to know, you should ask him yourself. He hasn't really opened up to me about it. He usually allows me to help him calm down, but that's about it. I think it would be good for him to talk about it, so if you ever get the chance. 𝐲𝐸𝐬 could see 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐬 nodding next to him, showing that he understood. He really hoped 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐬 might have more luck than he had. The rest of the ride was quiet except for 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐬 telling him when to turn. You should probably stay here, 𝐲𝐸𝐬 said when they arrived. He didn't think it would be easier with two people approaching him. 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐬 gave a small nod in understanding and 𝐲𝐸𝐬 took off down the beach. He knew 𝐬𝐡𝐢 would probably not be too close to the water. He was surprised he was even okay being on a beach with the water so close. 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐬 seemed to at least have some positive effect on him. It didn't take too long before he could see 𝐬𝐡𝐢 sitting on the sand further ahead. He had his head resting on his arms supported by his knees. As he got closer, he could hear uneven breathing and a small whisper. Breath, just breathe. Don't think, just breathe. In and out. 𝐲𝐸𝐬 sat down in front of him, careful not to touch him. He started breathing louder, making it easier for 𝐬𝐡𝐢 to hear it and follow it. After a while, 𝐬𝐡𝐢's breathing seemed to get calmer, but he still stayed with his head down. The girl is fine if you were worried about her. No response from 𝐬𝐡𝐢. All the damage from the robot was expected and is taken care of, so nothing you have to be worried about either. No response. No one is angry at you either. If anything, I'm angry at Nezu. Still no response. 𝐲𝐸𝐬 was starting to feel stupid sitting there. He had no idea what to say. He wasn't good at this. After all these months he had spent with the kid, he still didn't know what to do. Maybe he should have brought 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐬. 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐬 came too. He was worried about you. I'm fine, came a small grumble. A response. Finally, he had something to go on, even if it was blatantly clear that he was lying. 𝐬𝐡𝐢, it's okay not to be okay. I will listen to anything you have to say. 𝐬𝐡𝐢 finally lifted his head to look at him. What he was met with was not what he had expected. He had expected a sad face, not the furious look he was now receiving. What do you care anyway? 𝐲𝐸𝐬 was too shocked to say anything at first. He had taken care of this kid for over a year. Did he still not understand that he cared about him? Of course, I care. I have always cared about you. Really, I thought I only moved into your house because there was nobody else who wanted me, and I had nowhere else to go. The fact that I have been living with you for how long now, and you have still only taken up the responsibility of my ward actually speaks volumes. 𝐬𝐡𝐢 took a deep breath and rose up. I will see you back at the house, he said as he stood up and started walking away. 𝐲𝐸𝐬 was left sitting on the sand. It hadn't hit him before now that 𝐬𝐡𝐢 had never actually called their house his home. He hadn't officially adopted him because he still didn't believe he was what the kid needed. He had never thought 𝐬𝐡𝐢 really cared about it. Guess he was wrong. Katsuki was still leaning against Eraserhead's car while he waited when he saw 𝐬𝐡𝐢 coming his way. He didn't seem to have noticed him yet and was quickly walking away. Katsuki didn't know what to do. Had he talked to Eraserhead? Was he fine now? Should he stop him? He still hadn't managed to process what Eraserhead had told him before. He knew 𝐬𝐡𝐢 had some problems that he didn't want to talk about, that there was probably a story behind his fear of the water or his abrupt goodbyes sometimes. Katsuki had never dared to ask about it. He thought it was best to just give him space, and 𝐬𝐡𝐢 had never brought it up on his own. His running away in the middle of an exam, however, did not seem like something that could really be left alone. The other things Eraserhead had told him didn't put his mind at ease exactly either. With his mind made up, he started running after 𝐬𝐡𝐢, who still didn't give any sign he had noticed him. Deku, wait up. 𝐬𝐡𝐢 only glanced backwards and continued walking like he hadn't seen or heard him. Hey, don't ignore me. You seem to be catching up to me fine without me stopping. Katsuki finally caught up with 𝐬𝐡𝐢 and grabbed his arm to stop him. That's not the point and you know it. What's up with you anyway? Didn't the exam go as you wanted or something? Katsuki tried saying in his usually mocking voice. Judging from how you arrived here, 𝐬𝐡𝐢 nodded toward Mr. Aizawa's car. I think you know perfectly well how it went. Yes, I know you went out of your way to play the hero and took down the 0-pointer. Then you ran away with your tail between your legs for some reason. He wasn't exactly sure he was making the situation any better, but Katsuki had never been one to really consider other people's feelings, and he really wanted some answers. You know, when you save someone, you usually stay to make sure the person is all right. I already knew she was fine, 𝐬𝐡𝐢 answered, still seeming angry. Then why did you leave? Because. 𝐬𝐡𝐢 seemed to have an internal struggle for what to say. Why do you care anyway? Because, and I'm going to kill you for making me say this, you are my friend and I actually care about you enough to want to know when something is obviously wrong. That seemed to have diffused his anger a little. I don't know how to respond to that. You can start by telling me the truth. Katsuki thought he had finally gotten somewhere. Izuku still seemed to be struggling for what to say, but at least Katsuki wasn't afraid he was going to be punched in the face anymore. If you knew the truth, you wouldn't still be my friend. That was not what Katsuki expected to hear, and seemed to be quite an overstatement. What had him flying away from the physical exam anything to do with them being friends? Was Izuku thinking he wouldn't want to be his friend if he thought he was weak? But Katsuki knew he wasn't weak. He had actually never managed to beat him in a fair fight. And who was he telling him what he would or wouldn't do? Can't you let me be the judge of that? I mean, you can't possibly know that. I do. You want to be a hero after all. Let me know how the exam went when you get the results. Izuku gave him one last look before he leapt up in the air and disappeared. Katsuki was considering flying after him, but he knew he would never catch up if Izuku didn't want him to. He had also been caught illegally using his quirk one too many times. As he started making his own way home, he didn't know what to feel or think. He had never actually had any real friends before. He had followers, sure, but never a friend he had particularly cared or bothered to get to know. He had no idea what to do in this situation. Izuku wasn't the easiest person to read or understand. He was just about to turn down a street that would lead him to his home when he realized he still had the clothes offered by Yue on him, and all his other stuff was still left there too. Great. Izuku kept to himself for the next week. He didn't contact Katsuki in any way, and he only came down for dinner when 𝐲𝗧 called for him. They didn't talk more about the entrance exam, and Izuku was happy about that. He didn't know what had come over him. Flying away like that was cowardly. He had left the girl, who was probably also scared, alone. When he had managed to get through his panic, he was just so mad at himself. He really was useless for anything else than hurting people. He couldn't understand why 𝐲𝗧 and Katsuki even cared about him. Couldn't they see what kind of person he was? He was the kind of person who had spent years hurting other people to avoid suffering himself. Always a coward who took out his weakness on other people. There was a soft knock on the door before 𝐲𝗧 walked in with an envelope in his hand. The results from the entrance exam have arrived. Thanks, Izuku said as he took the envelope from 𝐲𝗧. He could feel him hesitating a little before walking out again. Izuku almost felt bad for him. He knew he was trying to help him, and Izuku wasn't exactly making that easy for him. In his defense, however, he didn't want his help, nor need it. He turned his attention to the envelope again. It was heavier than he had expected. It didn't feel like there was much paper inside, but instead some small round thing. He guessed there was no need to wonder about it and decided to just rip it open. Like he had thought, a small round metallic disc fell out, and as soon as it hit the desk it turned on and a hologram of 𝐴LLMIGHT appeared. I am here, as a hologram, to tell you about the score on your entrance exam, because I'm happy to say that I will be stepping in as a teacher at UA. Izuku did not know if he was happy about that or not. He liked 𝐴LLMIGHT for being perhaps the only hero who had ever stood up to his father and lived to tell the tale. When he had met him after that villain had attacked him, he had been amazed to see him. He had been a little worried, him being the son of his worst enemy, but he hadn't thought he would pay much attention to a random kid he saved. Spending several hours with him while he taught him how to be a hero, however, felt wrong, and what if he would recognize him, see his father in him? Although he guessed he hadn't even found out if he had gotten accepted or not. On the written exam you scored an almost perfect score. Impressive, young boy. But I must say your practical exam was even more impressive. You got an impressive 93 combat points from destroying the robots. There was also a hidden part of the exam where there was a panel of judges watching who awarded rescue points. Under the exam, you showed several times how you, instead of focusing on scoring points for yourself, choose to help others. That and your heroic actions in saving the girl from the 0-pointer have awarded you an extra 40 rescue points. With a total of 133 points, you take the top score from this year's applicants. Izuku was in complete disbelief. They had awarded him points for his catastrophe with the robot. He had never really been worried that he would not get accepted. He knew he had gotten more than enough points. He might have been a little worried they would erase points for his blunder with the girl, not award him points for it. A little part of him was also a little smug for winning over Katsuki. He could see from the scoreboard that he had scored 95 combat points and 1 rescue point with a total of 96 points. He was surprised he had managed to score even 1 rescue point. He would have guessed 0. And with that, Izuku, it is my pleasure to welcome you to your Hero Academia. With those last words from 𝐴LLMIGHT, the hologram turned off. Izuku leaned back in his chair and just let that sink in. He had made it. He was now officially going to attend UA. He was still not sure if he was happy about that or not. He felt like a fraud. He had hurt a lot of people and done bad things. He was sure that if everyone knew about that, he wouldn't still be sitting here. He would be locked up behind bars, never seeing the light of day again. That was why he didn't dare tell anyone. He couldn't bear the thought of being trapped again. Izuku didn't know how long he had sat there just thinking, but the next thing he knew, it was already dark outside. He could hear 𝐲𝗧 opening the door for someone downstairs. He couldn't hear who it was, but guessed it was only Yamada coming over for dinner, which he did sometimes. He was just about to forget about it when he could hear heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. Was the dinner already finished? When he heard the footsteps getting closer to his door, he rose from the chair and made to meet 𝐲𝐸 at the door. He would have to go down anyway then. When he made to step out, however, it was not 𝐲𝐸 he met standing there, but 𝐀𝐦, because it was indeed 𝐀𝐦 standing there with 2 heavy bags in each hand. Hello to you too, Deku. Now where can I put down these bags? And what are the bags for exactly? Sleepover. I will be staying here for 2 days. 𝐬𝐸 just looked at him stupidly. He had not agreed to this. All right, I will take your silence as an invitation to put them wherever I want, 𝐀𝐦 said as he pushed himself inside his room and dumped the bags on the middle of the floor. Why are you staying here? My parents will be out of town for the next 2 days. Now, Mr. Aizawa said there was a spare mattress in the room at the end of the hall to the right. 𝐀𝐦 disappeared out of the room again and came back 2 minutes later dumping a mattress on the floor again next to his bags. You didn't think it would be a good idea to ask me first, preferable before dumping your stuff in my room. 𝐀𝐦 looked at him like he was considering it. No, I knew you would say no. He was right about that. And I asked Mr. Aizawa, and he said it was fine. When you arrived 5 minutes ago. No, a week ago when you so rudely left me at the beach. I still had the clothes offered by the school on me and Mr. Aizawa offered to drive me back. 𝐬𝐸 didn't even know what to say about that. Not only had 𝐀𝐦 not asked him about it, 𝐲𝐸 had known about it for the past week and not said anything. 𝐀𝐦 was sure right when he thought he would say no. Waking up from a panic attack was not something he wanted 𝐀𝐦 to see. 𝐀𝐦 had suggested a couple of times that they should sleep over on the beach. 𝐬𝐸 had said no every time for that exact reason. So instead of giving up, 𝐀𝐦 apparently opted for another way, forcing himself inside his room with no chance of 𝐬𝐸 getting away. Not fair. Anyway, Mr. Aizawa said I should just drop off my stuff and then bring you back down with me. Dinner was almost ready. When 𝐬𝐸 gave no sign of moving, 𝐀𝐦 took his arm and started dragging him downstairs. Downstairs the food was indeed finished. The table was already made with 3 plates on it. The food was also evidence that 𝐲𝐸 had indeed known about 𝐀𝐦 staying over. He never put this much effort into making dinner on normal days. A normal dinner usually only consisted of, well, 𝐬𝐸 wasn't always sure. It often looked like you had just taken all of the leftovers from the fridge and then put them together in a stew or pot. But since it almost always looked like that, 𝐬𝐸 didn't know where 𝐲𝐸 got all the leftovers from. I thought the first thing you would do was gloat about winning the entrance exam bet. I can't believe there was such a thing as rescue points. For the record, if there hadn't been, I would have won with 2 points, 𝐀𝐦 said as they sat down at the table. I'm more surprised you managed to get a whole point yourself in rescue, 𝐬𝐸 said quietly, mockingly. I actually have no idea how that happened. I can't remember helping anyone, certainly wasn't trying to. 𝐀𝐦 answered, looking like he was still trying to figure out when it could have happened. You don't, 𝐲𝐸 asked from the other side of the table. You helped a girl with blonde hair take down a robot. Help her? I was trying to steal her points, 𝐀𝐦 exclaimed as he took it as a personal offense, then thinking he was trying to help someone. Really? You smiled at her before you left though. Because she looked like 𝐬𝐸 that time I blew up his ice cream in the middle of his face, 𝐀𝐦 said, grinning at the memory. I mean, you can't really say she looked thankful. Still never going to eat ice cream again because of that, 𝐬𝐸 grumbled. That was the first and only time 𝐬𝐸 had tried ice cream. His fascination with the taste was the only reason 𝐀𝐦 had managed to get the drop on him and ruin ice cream for him forever. Maybe not, but I wasn't the one judging the rescue points, so I'm not 100. That is where you got it from either. They ate mostly in silence after that, with the occasional small talk. 𝐬𝐸 kept quiet. He still didn't know what he was going to do about 𝐀𝐦 staying for 2 days. If it would have only been 1 day, he would have considered staying awake. 2 nights made that a little more complicated. As they finished the last of the food, they started cleaning the table when 𝐀𝐦 started talking again. I'm just curious. I mean, I kind of figured out Mr. Aizawa isn't your real dad. How come you live here? 𝐀𝐦 said it like it was any ordinary question. A saner person maybe would have realized that is an awkward question in any situation. Of course, 𝐀𝐦 was not a person to consider other people's feelings on normal days. It's complicated, was the only thing 𝐬𝐸 answered. And again, a normal person would see that as a sign to let it go. But not 𝐀𝐦. Is your father still alive then? 𝐬𝐸 could see 𝐲𝐸 stop what he was doing to listen. He had never asked about his parents and were probably wondering about that too. Unfortunately, yes, and if you don't want to spend the night outside, I recommend you drop the subject. Even 𝐀𝐦 seemed to hear the seriousness in his voice as he remained silent. He wasn't sure if it was a good thing to reveal that much. He suspected 𝐲𝐸 had tried to look into his parents, but there wasn't much to find about his mother and nothing to find about his father. When he hadn't found anything on his father, he had probably presumed him dead. His mother's mysterious disappearance had most likely left her presumed dead too. Revealing that his father was indeed not dead might make him try to look further into it again. Izuku knew he wouldn't find anything either way, of course. He had personally made sure of that. There had never been any information to find on his dad, all for one, or Hisashi Midoriya, which he had called himself when he had met his mother. His mother, however, had had a life before he had met him. She had had a family and friends, but he had taken all that away from her to create him. And when it turned out he was a failure, he had no longer use of her. Izuku had spent many nights looking into who his mother had been. It had always pained him when he had found something new, because that meant he had to erase another part of her life. It had of course been impossible to erase her completely. She was after all listed in multiple police stations as missing, and some people probably still remembered her. But he had at least erased anything that could tell anyone anything useful about who she was or why she disappeared. When nobody said anything else and the cleaning was done, Izuku turned towards his room again. He could hear Katsuki coming up behind him. As they arrived back in Izuku's room, he could see Katsuki making to close the door. "Don't leave it opened," he said as calm as possible. He could see Katsuki opening his mouth as if to ask why, but seemed to remember he had stepped over the line before and it was probably not a good idea to push him further for now. "Look, I'm sorry for downstairs, really. You mean you didn't think asking about my either dead or neglecting parents would be a sensitive subject?" Izuku answered sarcastically. "All right, yes, I did. But I also knew you would never tell me if I didn't push a little. I mean, I know absolutely nothing about you, because you are so open about your life," he sarcastically said again. "How about we play a little game then? You get to ask me a question and you have to answer one of mine." Izuku just looked at him like he was stupid, because this was a stupid idea. However, just as he was about to open his mouth to tell him so, he hesitated. A part of him wanted to find out more about Bakugo, and a part of him wanted Katsuki to know more about him too. He could always keep the answers as obscure as possible. Only tell him a part of the truth and lie if necessary. "All right, fine, but I decide when the game ends." Bakugo almost seemed to be in disbelief for a second. He didn't seem to have dared to believe that Izuku would say yes. But ever so slowly an almost evil grin crept upon his face. "As promised, you can start by asking me a question. Why don't you have any friends? Other than me, I guess." Katsuki's face immediately fell after that question. It seemed to hit him that he also had to answer hard and awkward questions. "And you say I was insensitive before?" Izuku gave him a look that said, "You started this." "You're wrong though. I have friends." Izuku only kept looking at him, forcing him to continue. "All right, I have people who would call me their friend, but I don't consider them that back. They only see me for my quirk. And I don't want to have friends who only want to be friends with me because I have a strong quirk, but at the same time being afraid of me for the exact same reason." This was the first time Katsuki had told him anything about his life too, especially something personal. Izuku couldn't really describe it, the feeling of being trusted. He supposed that Katsuki probably wanted someone to talk to too. That Izuku had been chosen as that person felt like an extreme honor of sorts. "Now it's my turn to ask. Why do you hate your father so much?" Izuku suspected this would be one of the first questions he would ask. That didn't make it any easier to answer it. To talk about what he had never dared to touch upon before. Maybe he would have refused to, if it hadn't been for Katsuki being honest with him in his question. "Because he's a monster, to put it lightly. He has never cared about anything other than power and strength, and I can't even find one good thing to say about him. I don't even know that much about him, to be honest. But all of it is bad." Izuku felt a little relief after saying it out loud. To have someone to know this small part of him at least. It wasn't all that made him hate him, of course, not even close. But he didn't think he would be able to say more. He didn't dare mention that he was the reason his mother was dead or all the other things he had made him go through. Izuku could see that Katsuki had listened intently. He probably realized there was more to it too, but understood that it was all he was going to get for now. "My turn again then. How about your parents then? Are they good, or whatever?" "Yes, I suppose. I mean, they have their flaws, like all parents do. My mother had a drinking problem for a while, but it's better now." Izuku suspected there was more to this story too, like there always was, but he only nodded. "So, why are you afraid of water?" Another question Izuku had known, but at the same time hoped wouldn't come up. How to explain this without actually explaining it? "Well, firstly, I guess because I don't know how to swim." "You have never learned to swim." "Well, thank you for pointing out that obvious flaw in my childhood." "All right, I will shut up. Continue." "And also, because I have no good memories associated with water." "What kind of memories do you associate with water?" "Will that be your third question?" Izuku could see Katsuki stopping to think about it. He certainly hoped it wouldn't be. He would need some time to think up some lie in that case, because he was not ready to tell him the truth about that subject. "I will need more time to think about it. Don't want to waste any of my questions. It's your turn now, anyway, ask away." Izuku almost sighed at relief at that. Now for a question to ask Katsuki. "Why do you want to become a hero?" "One part of it, I guess, is because everyone expected me to become it because of my quirk. But the biggest part is that I got inspired by All Might. He's the #1 hero and my dream is to surpass him." "Not a small dream you have there. No, especially when I have you to contend with now too, 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬 said with a smile that totally was an invitation to a challenge. He could see 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬 started to think about the next question he would ask again. He was fully prepared for it to be about his fear of water again and started to think of stories. He could have been in an accident where his pet drowned, or more likely his failed attempt at learning to swim had landed him in the hospital, or how about your mother? Where is she? Izuku was so caught off guard by the question that for a moment he just sat there. When he realized 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬 still was waiting for the answer, he only said, "Dead. I'm finished playing now. It's late anyway. We should get ready for sleep. The bathroom is down the hall to the left if you need it." He was not ready to talk about his mother. It was also true that it was getting late. He hadn't noticed how much time had passed, and when he thought about it, he was starting to get tired. 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬 didn't protest it either as he disappeared out the door and Izuku took the time to change into his pajamas. When 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬 came back, they didn't say much as they prepared to go to sleep. Izuku couldn't explain it, but as he laid down in bed and started feeling himself drift away, he knew he wouldn't be having a nightmare that night. Even after 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬's last unexpected question about his mother, it still felt freeing to open up, however little it was. When Izuku later fell asleep, it was to blissful, dreamless darkness. Izuku awoke to 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬 starting to stir from his spot on the floor. He started rubbing his eyes, and for once when Izuku woke up he was feeling rested. He sat up in his bed when he heard 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬 letting out a loud groan. "You okay down there?" he asked as he peered over his bed down to where 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬 was lying with carrot atop his face. "Yes, but can you please tell your stupid cat that I need 5 more minutes?" 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬 grumbled out. "She has been trying to suffocate me all night." Izuku only looked down at him with an unbothered look. He had indeed not been bothered by Carrot a single time this night. Seemed like she had chosen a new victim. Carrot always liked to lay in somebody's bed at night. 𝐲𝐻𝐢 had grown tired of her always waking him up at night, sometimes in less pleasant ways, so he kept his door closed, but since Izuku always left his open, he didn't dislike Carrot keeping him company in bed. He liked it, even if she could get a little too close and personal sometimes, like she was with 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬𝐬 now. "No, you're her new victim now. She has deemed you rested enough to pet her." 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬𝐬 only groaned again as he started petting her, Carrot happily starting to purr. As Izuku and 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬𝐬 started making their way down the stairs 10 minutes later, they could hear 𝐲𝐻𝐢 was already making breakfast. Sitting down at the table, 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬𝐬 looked like he still wasn't fully awake. "I see Carrot choose 𝗵𝘃𝐻𝐸 as her victim this night," Aizawa said with a smile as he put down the plates before them on the table. 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬𝐬 didn't seem to deem that worth an answer as he started to dig into his eggs. "Well, if you two aren't too tired after breakfast, how would you feel about trying out a new obstacle course I have been making?" "Yes," 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬𝐬 immediately exclaimed as he totally forgot about his food. That at least seemed to make him wake up fully. 𝐲𝐻𝐢 turned his attention towards Izuku, waiting for his response. He only nodded and gave a short sure before he turned his attention to the food again. It was always fun with a challenge. 1 hour later, Izuku and 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬𝐬 arrived in Gym Gamma in their gym clothes. It was obvious 𝐲𝐻𝐢 had gotten help from 𝐶EMENTOS when making this obstacle course, which looked more like a death trap. That, however, was not something that scared either of them. "So, what does the winner get?" Izuku asked as he looked at 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬𝐬 in a challenge. "How about the loser has to deal with Carrot, or whatever that stupid cat's name was, this night?" "You hated her so much?" Izuku asked innocently. "I still have her hair in my mouth." "All right, fine with me. This will be easy. I will just blast my way through," 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬𝐬 said in a confident voice. That confidence soon disappeared. "Sorry to disappoint 𝗵𝘃𝐻𝐸, but this exercise is supposed to be completed quirkless," 𝐲𝐻𝐢 informed them as they reached him. "What? You expect us to get through that alive without quirks?" 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬 exclaimed in disbelief. "Yes, and if I see as much as a trace of any quirk, I will personally erase it. Don't worry, I have asked Recovery Girl to be on standby. I have also asked 𝐶EMENTOS to help make it a little harder." Oh, this was going to be fun, Izuku thought as 𝐲𝐻𝐢 explained the rules. The rules were then if they failed to clear an obstacle on the first try, they had to restart from the beginning. They had an unlimited amount of time, but they would fail if they broke anything or were hurt badly enough not to be able to continue. A rule that was totally serious and could only be implemented when you had Recovery Girl on speed dial. The first few obstacles weren't too hard. It was things like monkey bars and balancing over a log. It only got harder and harder from there, however. One obstacle, you had to dig your way under a wall, but the sand slowly refilled as you dug, making you have to dig like an idiot to make the hole grow bigger. If you were halfway through when it closed, you also had to restart from the beginning. Another was a climbing wall where the grips disappeared after 5 seconds, so you had to climb fast before they disappeared. Some obstacles almost seemed impossible, where the distances you had to reach were almost too far. Neither Izuku nor 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬 gave up though. 𝐲𝐻𝐢 had to erase 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬's quirk a few times when his temper got the better of him. He seemed to be very motivated to not have to deal with Carrot that night. After 5 hours, 𝐲𝐻𝐢 ordered them to take a break and eat something. They agreed to it begrudgingly. Both 𝐀𝐦 and 𝐍𝐸 had to make a quick stop at Recovery Girl too. Both were bleeding from small wounds all over their bodies, neither of them sure when that had happened. 𝐀𝐦 had also an almost broken nose from getting hit in the face by a boulder, a close call. 𝐍𝐸 could tell Recovery Girl was not happy when they left. That didn't stop them from being back at it 40 minutes later though. 6 hours later they were both at the last obstacle. How in the world does he expect us to get over this? 𝐀𝐦 panted angrily as they were standing in front of a 2.5-meter tall wall. No idea, 𝐍𝐸 answered, also panting with his hands on his knees. Being creative, he suggested as he started looking around. There was no sign of anything that could help them get over, or just run and jump as high as you can, 𝐍𝐸 concluded. They both backed up and made some brave attempts to reach the top of the wall. After 10 minutes they both realized it was impossible. I think I know what he wants us to do, 𝐍𝐸 said with a sigh. What? Work together. If you help me up first, I can help you up from there, and let you take the win. Not a chance. You can help me up first and then I can help you. You think I will trust someone who only got 1 rescue point on the entrance exam, and only because the judges misjudged your mocking smile for a kind one? They squabbled like that for a while before they decided on the grown-up way of deciding who would go first. Rock, paper, scissors, which 𝐍𝐸 of course won. All right, but if you betray me, I will kill you later, 𝐀𝐦 said with a serious look. Or as serious as you could look after 6 hours of hard work and a face dripping with sweat, mud, and probably some blood. Promise. They walked up to the wall again and both of them managed to get up the wall after some trouble. Both of them having finished the obstacle course, they walked back sore and exhausted to where 𝐲𝐻 was sitting waiting for them. Congrats. It only took you 11 hours to figure out you had to work together, 𝐲𝐻 said in a sarcastic tone. Let's hope it doesn't take that long for your future classmates. That was the point of this exercise. Both 𝐍𝐸 and 𝐀𝐦 exclaimed, exasperated. Yes, I'm honestly surprised how far you managed to get by yourself. I deliberately tried to make some of the obstacles as hard as possible to make it almost impossible to clear them by yourself. That explained the almost too far distances. I asked Hisashi to prepare dinner. It will be ready when you have finished changing. 𝐍𝐸 and 𝐀𝐦 only nodded. Both of them were too tired to say anything. Don't forget to go to Recovery Girl too, 𝐲𝐻 shouted after them. It was a miracle they even made it back to the house after Recovery Girl was finished with them. She didn't even heal them that much, only giving them some band-aids and bandages for the worst. They would have to come back tomorrow, she said as they left. The smell from the kitchen was amazing as they opened the door. Yamada's food never disappoints you. Well, you look like you have had a hard day. Yamada greeted them with a grin as he saw them. Hope you're hungry. Starving, 𝐀𝐦 said as he sank down in his chair. When all 4 of them had sat down, they started eating. The only ones talking were Yamada and 𝐲𝐻, 𝐀𝐦 and 𝐍𝐸 only nodding or shaking their heads occasionally, too focused on their food. As they finished eating, both 𝐍𝐸 and 𝐀𝐦 were too tired to do anything else than go lay down on their respective bed. It didn't take more than 5 minutes before 𝐀𝐦 groaned loudly. Your stupid cat has arrived again, 𝐀𝐦 said irately. Well, seems like she has chosen you this night too, 𝐍𝐸 answered, not even caring to look down at him. He was a little hurt that 𝐀𝐦 had chosen 𝐀𝐦's bed twice now. He guessed it was probably because he was someone new and interesting. 𝐍𝐸 thought it funny, however, how awkward and uncomfortable he was with her. It reminded him of how he had been himself when she first met her. It was that interaction he had worked so hard for today to see. They had decided it was a tie in the end since they had to work together. Even if 𝐍𝐸 thought it should have been him because he won the rock, paper, scissors game. Seemed like 𝐀𝐦 agreed with him too. He could at least believe that that was another reason for her to choose 𝐀𝐦. If she suffocates me in my sleep, just know that it's on you, 𝐀𝐦 grumbled out. I think I can live with that. Would make a good headline. Prospering new hero student killed in his sleep by too cuddly cat, 𝐍𝐸 said, starting to giggle, actually giggling. He could not remember the last time he had even given a genuine smile, and here he was, giggling. 𝐍𝐸 could hear muffled laughing from 𝐀𝐦 too, probably trying to hide it in his pillow. A real heroic way to go, 𝐀𝐦 said, and started laughing more. They really were too tired for this. Some deep breath later they both managed to calm down again. Neither of them bothered to change into their pajamas as they crawled beneath their blankets. Sleep immediately started to pull at them and they were out in only a few minutes. 𝐍𝐸 was standing in front of his father. At his feet was 𝐀𝐦, kneeling. His father had his hand before 𝐀�Y's head, and a glow that was very familiar to 𝐍𝐸 by now was coming from it. His father looked up at him. He has a strong quirk, 𝐍𝐸. Thank you for bringing him to my attention. A wide grin spread on his face, although I think your friendship might be a little strained from now on. 𝐍𝐸 tried to speak. No, 𝐍𝐸 would never let 𝐀𝐦 lose his quirk because of him. The image shifted. His father was still in front of him, but this time 𝐲𝐻 was lying at his feet, dead. You think this hero can protect you? Huh, he can't even protect himself. The next second 𝐀𝐦 was lying there too. Dead eyes stared back at him. No, he never wanted this. He tried to run away, but his father's voice was in his head. You can't get away, 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸. You think you're safe, but I can get you anytime I want. I know exactly where you are. The dream shifts again, and this time he's standing inside 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸. Every building is on fire and people are screaming. You brought this upon them, 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸. I think it's time for you to come home soon. The doctor misses you so dearly. Suddenly he's strapped to that table again. The doctor standing over him with a syringe in his hand. Just relax, 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸. This will be over soon, the doctor says as he plunges the syringe deep into his arm. 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸 wakes up gasping for air. Katsuki was back at the obstacle course standing in front of the wall. There had to be some way of doing this alone. He looked around and nothing had changed. There was nothing that could help him, but there had to be a way. He became frustrated, starting to punch the wall. He punched and punched, but nothing happened. There wasn't a single mark on it. Was he really that weak? No, he could do it. Otherwise his mother would. There was something wet on his face. He looked around but couldn't find the source. It wasn't raining, and there were no obstacles including water. It felt like a wet rag was being dragged over his face, and it was only being pressed down harder and harder. He tried to rub it off, but the feeling wouldn't go away. What was happening? He kept rubbing and rubbing. He was starting to become so frustrated he wanted to scream. Just as he was about to smash his head against the wall, his nose exploded in pain, and he sat straight up in his bed. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 was biting down into his nose, hard. Now that he was sitting up, she was almost dangling in front of him. The only grip she had was her teeth sinking into his nose. "Wah, stupid cat," he hissed as he took her by the neck and threw her away. He could feel his nose starting to bleed from 4 puncture wounds. What was wrong with that cat anyway? He had barely finished the thought as he could see 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸 also sitting up in his bed. He was panting hard, seeming to have no control over his breathing. "Deku," he sputtered as he rushed for him. "Are you okay?" He sat himself low in front of him, trying to get 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸's attention. He could see his eyes flutter to meet his for a second, but he immediately avoided them again. "Hey, what can I do?" he asked in a panic. Katsuki had never seen 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸 like this and had no idea what to do. He tried to get his attention again, but nothing seemed to work. "I will get Aizawa, okay." There was no reaction, but he didn't know what else to do. He quickly stood up and rushed out the door, looking around. He had no idea which room Aizawa was in. He was about to freak out even more when he saw 𝐻𝐻𝐸 scraping at a door further down the hall, trying to get in. He didn't have time to think about it and rushed for the door and flung it open. Inside he could see Aizawa sleeping in his bed. "Aizawa, wake up," he frantically pleaded as he shook him awake. Aizawa looked up at him in a daze before he met Katsuki's panicked face. 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸 was the only thing he managed to say before Aizawa was already up and out the door. Katsuki was left standing at the place where Aizawa had disappeared out the door. He was not sure what he was supposed to do. He wanted to help, but he didn't know how. He found himself tracing his steps back towards 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸's room. He stopped in the door frame, looking in to see Aizawa talking calmly to 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸. He could hear Aizawa breathing loudly and slowly and seeming to try to get 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸 to do the same. Katsuki didn't know how much use he was just standing there, but he wanted to see what Aizawa did to help him. He suspected this wasn't the last time he would see 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸 like this, and he wanted to know what to do the next time. After a few minutes of just breathing, 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸 seemed to have calmed down. "You okay now, 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸?" Aizawa asked 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸, and 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸 nodded his head slowly. "Yeah, I'm fine." Katsuki walked towards 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸 with purposeful steps. He looked at him for a second, and then he hit him hard on the shoulder. Aizawa didn't even seem surprised. "There is no way you are fine after that," Katsuki exclaimed in anger. "Well, everything is relative," 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸 responded in a monotone voice. "However, I don't understand how hitting me would help. Want me to hit you back?" That kind of humor was so much like 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸 that Katsuki couldn't help but start laughing. It was something with the tension leaving that made him unable to control it. He could see Aizawa's mouth twitching at the corners too. "I suspect that even if it's 4 a.m., Aizawa stated while looking at his phone, "neither of you will be able to sleep again. So, I will go down and prepare something to eat. You can come down when you're ready. 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸, you can help Bakugo clean his face." Katsuki was confused for a second before he remembered how 𝐻𝐻𝐸 had woken him. He had been so full of adrenaline before that he hadn't felt it, but now that he had calmed down, he could feel his nose starting to throb. The blood was also starting to make its way down and into his mouth, giving him the taste of iron. He couldn't even bring himself to be mad at the cat for doing it. Somehow, she had known 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸 needed help and tried to wake him. The cat was smarter than she seemed. The cat in question had already found her a spot on 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸's lap where she purred happily. 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸 only picked her up and led Katsuki to the bathroom with her in his arms. "You aren't even going to ask what happened? You know you have the culprit in your arms, right? Presumptuous of you to think that this is the first time this has happened." 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸 answered, gesturing towards his nose with his free hand. "I'm only glad it was you this time." Katsuki hadn't noticed before, but indeed, 𝐬𝐻𝐻𝐸 had 4 white dots on his nose, 2 on each side. It wasn't noticeable if you weren't looking for it, but still very much there. When he looked closer, it even seemed it wasn't from only one time either. "How many times has she done it to you?" he asked with laughter in his voice. "To me, I think 6 times. She has done it to 𝐲𝐸 2 times too, but after the second time he always keeps his door closed." "Understandable," 𝐬𝐻𝐸 muttered. "Well, at least now we will all match," he added with a malicious grin. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 only hummed an answer as he was looking through the cabinets, having put the cat down. When he turned around, he had a wet cloth in one hand and gauze in the other. "Here," 𝐬𝐻𝐸 said as he threw the wet cloth toward 𝐬𝐻𝐸's face. He barely caught it before it hit him. "Start cleaning it with that," he obeyed and started to dab it at the puncture wounds. While 𝐬𝐻𝐸 was tending to his wound, he observed 𝐬𝐻𝐸. He was still looking a little pale and antsy, but it was better than before. His hair was a little damp, probably from sweat. He still had the hoodie he had been sleeping with on, and judging by his hair, it was probably soaked. "Shouldn't you change clothes? I don't understand how you can even sleep in a hoodie in the first place. Your room is boiling." "I usually don't," 𝐬𝐻𝐸 just answers absent-mindedly as he comes over to put the gauze on his nose. "Then why are you now?" 𝐬𝐻𝐸 asks accusingly. He had never really put much thought into it, but he had never seen 𝐬𝐻𝐸 in short sleeves. When they trained at the beach, 𝐬𝐻𝐸 had often removed his shirt due to being too warm, but 𝐬𝐻𝐸 had always kept a hoodie on. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 had thought it could be something simple as 𝐬𝐻𝐸 being cold-blooded or something. He never wanted to get close to the water, so he had never really had any reason to. But maybe there was more to it, because I felt like it. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 only shrugged as he put the gauze on. That was a lie, and 𝐬𝐻𝐸 could tell. Before 𝐬𝐻𝐸 could pull his hand back as he finished putting the gauze on, 𝐬𝐻𝐸 grabbed his left arm and pulled up his sleeve. From what little he had time to see before 𝐬𝐻𝐸 pulled his arm away, "Look. Horrible. What the heck was that?" he asked in outrage. His arm was covered in scars, both big and small ones. Some of them reached down to his hands too, but he had never noticed. Had he paid this little attention to 𝐬𝐻𝐸? "It's nothing," 𝐬𝐻𝐸 answers with a sigh. "You know, sometimes you are too nosy for your own good. Like hell, that's nothing." "What? Or who did that to you?" 𝐬𝐻𝐸 started rubbing his arm absent-mindedly. "Well, I told you my father was a monster. Your father did that to you. Not directly, but in a way, he is the reason for them. I really don't want to talk about it." 𝐬𝐻𝐸 was so angry he barely knew what to do with himself. "Does Aizawa know about it? About the scars?" "Yes, of course. But he doesn't know the specifics about how I got them either." Carrot was at 𝐬𝐻𝐸's feet begging to be picked up. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 obeyed her and bowed down to pick her up in his arms, where she immediately started purring again. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 would almost say it looked like the cat was worried about 𝐬𝐻𝐸 and was trying to calm him down. It really was a strange cat. "Why would you try to keep that hidden from me?" 𝐬𝐻𝐸 asked in an almost hurt voice. He had known 𝐬𝐻𝐸 for almost a year after all. He thought 𝐬𝐻𝐸 trusted him more, that he knew 𝐬𝐻𝐸 better than this. "Because I'm not ready to talk about it, and I knew you wouldn't stop asking me about it once you saw." "All right," 𝐬𝐻𝐸 sighed in defeat. That was probably true, he would have. "I promise I won't ask about it. So, you don't have to hide them anymore." 𝐬𝐻𝐸 nodded slowly, seeming to think about it. "Fine, we should head down now. 𝐲𝐸 is probably finished by now." They exited the bathroom and started making their way through the hallway. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 stopped outside his door and gestured to 𝐬𝐻𝐸 to keep going. "I will come down soon," 𝐬𝐻𝐸 said as he slipped through the door. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 only shrugged and went down to the kitchen, where Aizawa was sitting at the table. There were plates with sandwiches and eggs on waiting for them, and 𝐬𝐻𝐸 sat down at one of the chairs. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 came down only a minute later. He had changed out of the hoodie and into a new t-shirt, arms on full display. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 couldn't help but be a little mad at seeing it. Aizawa made no sign of surprise at seeing 𝐬𝐻𝐸 in short sleeves, which meant that it was true that 𝐬𝐻𝐸 had only been actively trying to hide it from him. It was hard not glancing towards them. 𝐬𝐻𝐸's scars. They didn't only cover his left arm, which he had seen before, but his right too. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 suspected those weren't the only places they could be found either. There were both big and small ones, and 𝐬𝐻𝐸 could tell they had been accumulated over a long time. As promised, though, he didn't say anything about it as 𝐬𝐻𝐸 sat down at the table. They ate mostly in silence, and the rest of the day was spent on the sofa watching movies. They were both tired from yesterday's training, and the less than ideal sleep they had gotten wasn't helping. When they had returned to Recovery Girl's office to finish their healing, she had only waved them off again. They were apparently still too tired and would just have to heal it by themselves instead. When 𝐬𝐻𝐸's parents had come to pick him up later in the afternoon, they had both managed to fall asleep on the sofa. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 was reluctant to go home. He didn't want to leave 𝐬𝐻𝐸 after what had happened and after what he had found out. He knew they were old wounds 𝐬𝐻𝐸 couldn't do anything about now, but it still felt wrong. As 𝐬𝐻𝐸 was sitting in the car, however, he couldn't help a small smile. It had been two of the best days 𝐬𝐻𝐸 had had in a long time, even despite the bad. He would definitely force his way into another sleepover again, and he wouldn't let 𝐬𝐻𝐸 say no. The next day, 𝐬𝐻𝐸 made a decision. He needed to tell 𝐲𝐸. Maybe not everything, but he needed to know the danger that came with protecting him. His nightmare the night before hadn't been the first of its kind, but there was just something different about it. It had felt like a warning, and 𝐬𝐻𝐸 wasn't about to ignore it. So, when 𝐬𝐻𝐸 came down to breakfast the next day, he had a serious expression on his face. It didn't take long for 𝐲𝐻𝐸 to notice it and stop what he was doing. They both sat down opposite to each other at the table, neither saying anything right away. I need to tell you something. 𝐲𝐻𝐸 didn't say anything but just nodded, signaling that he was listening. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 suspected he was probably afraid of saying the wrong thing. I know I should have told you this sooner, but I didn't know how. Still don't really know. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 hesitated for a second, thinking of what he should say next. And I understand if you wouldn't want me here anymore after. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 𝐲𝐻𝐸 interrupts. Nothing you can say would make me leave you. Hearing 𝐲𝐻𝐸 say that makes him feel a little better, even if he doesn't really believe it. He hadn't even started yet. Well, to start, my father is a huge figure in the underworld. However, he is so hidden in the dark I doubt you would even know who he is even if I told you his name. Or at least what he's known as. Honestly, not even I know his real name or what it was. That had always scared 𝐬𝐻𝐸 a little. He knew his father was old, older than should be humanly possible. He doubted even his father remembered his old name. When I was born, he wanted me to become his successor, but when my quirk came, it wasn't suitable. Despite that, I still inherited some of his physical and mental attributes. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 took a deep breath, remembering everything that was done to him. There was this doctor who took advantage of that in some of his experiments. He was trying to make these creatures with multiple quirks. He called them 𝐴𝐻𝐸s. The latest I know is he wasn't finished, but I think it's only a matter of time. They are supposed to be strong enough even to rival All Might. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 thinks that if he was able to, he would cry. Instead, he just felt empty. He experimented on human corpses. I can still smell it sometimes. That smell of... 𝐬𝐻𝐸 couldn't finish the sentence. The memory is still too fresh in his mind. From the other side of the table, 𝐲𝐻𝐸 was standing up. He started to come around the table and 𝐬𝐻𝐸 was fully prepared to be yelled at or thrown out. Instead, 𝐲𝐻𝐸 just crouched before him and hugged him. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 usually didn't like physical contact, but he couldn't help but melt into it. He made no move to return the hug. He just sat there leaning into him. 𝐬𝐻𝐸, nothing of that is your fault, 𝐲𝐻𝐸 said, still embracing him. Some of it sounds worrying and I will start to look into it. I understand why you wouldn't want to talk about this sooner. Just know that none of what happened or may happen is your fault. He will want me back. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 forces out. I'm still useful to him and a danger. 𝐲𝐻𝐸 hugs him tighter. I won't let anything happen to you. 𝐸𝐸 is more than capable of keeping you safe. They kept sitting like that for a while before 𝐲𝐻𝐸 finally got up. I will talk to 𝐀𝐦 about this. You all right here on your own for a while? 𝐬𝐻𝐸 only nodded. He felt like he wanted to be alone for a while now anyway. I will be back before dinner, 𝐲𝐻𝐸 says as he pats 𝐬𝐻𝐸's head before he heads for the door. When 𝐲𝐻𝐸 exits the door, 𝐬𝐻𝐸 returns to his room. He's glad he told 𝐲𝐻𝐸 everything. Deep down he thinks he knew he would never throw him out, but it was still reliving hearing it. Now he could just wait and see what would happen next. 𝐲𝐻𝐸 didn't know what to think as he headed toward 𝐀𝐦's office. He didn't know what he had expected to hear as 𝐬𝐻𝐸 entered the kitchen. He had seen he had something he wanted to say as soon as he entered the room. He had not been expected to find out as much as he had, however. 𝐬𝐻𝐸's father was a villain. His own father had put that bracelet on his wrist. His own father had forced him to do things against his will, experimented with him. How long had it been going on for? Had 𝐬𝐻𝐸 ever gotten any love or understanding during his childhood? How broken was he truly inside? 𝐲𝐻𝐸 had already asked if 𝐬𝐻𝐸 wanted therapy multiple times and the answer was always no. 𝐲𝐻𝐸 understood that since he himself didn't like it, he would feel hypocritical to encourage 𝐬𝐻𝐸 too much into it when he wasn't the best example. But maybe it really would be a great idea. As he arrived at 𝐀𝐦's office, the door opened before he could even start to knock. He was as attentive as always. What can I do for you this morning, Aizawa? 𝐀𝐦 asked, sitting behind his desk. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 opened up a bit to me. He told me some worrisome facts I would like to discuss with you. 𝐀𝐦 nodded and gestured for him to sit down. I see. Must be serious if you went straight to me. Have you ever heard of anything named a 𝐴𝐸? 𝐀𝐦 leaned back in his chair, seeming to think it over. No, I can't say I have. I suspect that was something 𝐬𝐻𝐸 told you about. Yes, he said they were reanimated corpses supposedly being able to contain multiple quirks. They are apparently supposed to be strong enough to take on even All Might. I see, 𝐀𝐦 said, leaning forward in his chair. He had one of the most serious expressions 𝐲𝐻𝐸 had ever seen on the rat. What more did he tell you? 𝐲𝐻𝐸 got a little nervous from the look 𝐀𝐦 was giving him. When 𝐀𝐦 got serious, it was never a good sign. He told me his father was a villain in the underworld. It was strange because he said he didn't know his name, that he was known by an alias that he doubted even I would know, something about him becoming his successor, but not being good enough. 𝐀𝐦 didn't say anything for a long while. 𝐲𝐻𝐸 almost gave up on him saying anything more when he finally spoke up again. No, I doubt you would. You know who it is then. 𝐲𝐴 inquired with a voice that demanded answers. Yes, I do think so. But you're not going to tell me, 𝐲𝐴 said with an exasperated sigh. No, but if Midoriya chooses to tell you, there is nothing I can do about it. He wasn't even surprised, not by the fact that Nezu seemed to know who Izuku was referring to or that he didn't want to tell him. Is there something you plan to tell me that I should be aware of at least? I think it would be best to keep Midoriya on campus for the foreseeable future. 𝐲𝐴 narrowed his eyes at Nezu. Why? Well, I think that should be obvious. To keep a better eye on him, of course. 𝐲𝐴 didn't know what to think about that. He felt sorry for the kid. He knew how restless he could get when he wasn't allowed to move freely. However, if Nezu thought the threat was great enough to implement such a rule for him, it probably was for the best. I understand. I will let him know. 𝐲𝐴 made to leave, heading towards the door. And Aizawa Nezu interrupted him before he could open the door. Give him my regards for making it into the hero course. 𝐲𝐴 only nodded before he exited. When Shota made it back to the house, he found Izuku passed out on the sofa. There was a movie playing on the TV he didn't recognize. Didn't seem to be too interesting though if Izuku had fallen asleep to it. He picked up a blanket and made to put it over Izuku. However, just as the fabric slightly touched the kid, he was up, flipping over the sofa and on the other side of the room before 𝐲𝐴 could even react. Hey, relax kid. It's only me. 𝐲𝐴 could see Izuku's shoulders relaxing as he made his way back to the sofa. Sorry about that. He apologized sheepishly as he sat down again. So, I talked to Nezu, 𝐲𝐴 started. He could see the kid tense up a little again but seemed to actively try to keep a neutral expression. He said he thought it would be best for you to stay close for the time being. He knows who it is. My father? Izuku asked, not quite as a question but more a statement. Yes, he seemed to. Then he didn't tell you. Not quite a question either, but he felt obliged to answer anyway. No, he said you could though, if you want. I don't, Izuku said without seeming to even humor the thought. All right, 𝐲𝐴 said, controlling his frustration. I can't force you, neither you nor Nezu. Just know it would make it a lot easier to protect you if I knew. Izuku didn't say anything more and just kept his gaze on the floor. 𝐲𝐴 understood the kid, he really did. He knew it was still traumatic for the kid and talking about it was hard. 𝐲𝐴, however, hated being left in the dark. Why didn't even Nezu want to tell him? Was it really that big of a secret? 𝐲𝐴 had been working in the underground all his career, over 10 years, and he had never even heard of some big figure that could be behind the scenes. He thought All Might had put a stop to all the organized crime. But there apparently was. Someone Nezu didn't even need a name to identify. Someone who was making Namus supposedly powerful enough to take down All Might. Someone who was so shrouded in darkness and mysterious that not even he had heard a whisper of him. That someone was apparently his Kai, Izuku's father, and no one was even going to tell him his name. Fine, 𝐲𝐴 finally said with a heavy sigh. Something tells me I am going to find out soon anyway. Nezu also wanted me to congratulate you on your acceptance into UA. With that, 𝐲𝐴 left Izuku to watch his movie again. He on the other hand needed to punch something.